I am Kyla's stepmother, currently in a relationship, quite similar to a romantic one. You might ask how that could be possible, but there's a valid reason for everything. Let me confess what happened to us. We met through our parents' introduction. Kyla's dad was a divorcee and I was unmarried. I worked as a freelancer with a slightly higher income than office workers. I took pride in my job and enjoyed working, but I was introduced to a man, supposedly very diligent, who was divorced and raising his son alone. Turns out, Kyle's dad was a man dedicated to his family. When Kyle became a middle school student, his mother expressed her desire to travel overseas with friends, and she traveled abroad twice a year. Kyle's dad, believing she deserved the break after raising Kyle, willingly supported her financially. However, the world was too small a place. A friend of Kyle's dad noticed Kyle's mother walking arm in arm with another man, secretly took a photo and sent it to Kyle's dad. Kyle's mother had not gone on a trip with a friend but with her secret lover. She pretended not to know Kyle's dad's friend, who she knew well, at the vacation spot. Kyle's dad was a man who worked diligently to support his family, and family was all that he knew. Kyle was a gentle and exemplary student who took care of everything if his meals and laundry were taken care of. Kyle's mother had an affair with a man she met at an alumni meeting, and upon seeing a photo of her overseas, taken by a friend, Kyle's dad followed her. He had believed she was playing her roles as a mother and wife well, but it felt like the sky was falling when he saw her entering a motel with another man. Looking back, she had changed her phone patterns, locked her phone over trivial matters, and stopped caring for Kyle. She failed to prepare proper meals for her teenage son, and only cared about her own appearance. She seemed quite happy, giggling while looking at her phone. She had a boyfriend, so she was happy, and she didn't care about her son. Kyle's dad made the big decision to get a divorce by mutual consent and lived with Kyle. People around him couldn't let him. Family-oriented man with financial stability live alone. They kept introducing him to other women. That's how he and I met. Kind eyes, gentle speech, and a handsome face were Kyle's dad's trademarks. I wanted to give him bonus points for being a man with a grown-up son. I mean, he took full responsibility for his son. When we got married as Kyle started high school, our family of 3 lived happily. Kyle called me Mom and he said, "I hope you live well with Dad. I trust Mom and will follow her," while talking about his biological mother's wrongdoings. So I took good care of Kyle. Kyle's dad suggested having a baby, but I was rather old, and for Kyle's emotional stability, I said we shouldn't have a baby. We were living happily in our new family when Kyle's dad was hit by a car, driven by a drunk driver on his way home from work, and died on the spot. What was so urgent that he had to leave us less than 2 years after we started living together? I resented the heavens. Moreover, when Kyle was in his junior year of high school, such an incident occurred. After losing his father, Kyle seemed lost for a while, but then focused on his studies. Seeing him like this made me feel strong, and we lived supporting each other. Some people said that since he was not my biological child, and now an adult, he should move out, but I could never do that to Kyle. He had many traits similar to his father. His father used to clean up the dishes after meals, fold laundry together, tidy up the bathroom after taking a bath, and even organize the groceries together when he came back from the supermarket. After his father had gone to heaven, Kyle helped me keep things in order around the house, just like his father. Seeing Kyle like this was a comfort to me, who was feeling depressed due to my husband's absence. Kyle became a college student and started dating a girl. They were the same age and had been dating for a year when Kyle said he was going to join the military, and she broke up with him. She said she couldn't see him when she wanted to, so she would meet a senior in her department who liked her. Seeing Kyle so sad after being dumped by his first girlfriend was heartbreaking. I thanked him for trusting me and confiding in me, and when he smiled and said, "I'll meet a good woman like you someday," I felt relieved. Kyle joined the Air Force, and although his military service was a bit long, he had more leaves and outings. On his first leave, Kyle said that military life was very hard at first. I suggested going to Broadway to see a musical and clear his head, and Kyle was thrilled and followed me. To introduce myself, I inherited good genes from my parents. Since I was young, I was taller than most girls my age, and thankfully, I didn't gain weight in proportion to the amount of food I ate. With a height of 173 cm and a weight of only 60 kg, I was quite slim. Moreover, with my bright skin tone, high nose, and deep double eyelids, people would whisper, "Look at that woman, isn't she pretty?" as I passed by. I somewhat enjoyed such attention. Excited to go to downtown after a long time, I wore a dress I used to wear when I was working. The length of the dress was above the knee, and the zipper was at the back, and I needed Kyle's help to zip it up. When I linked arms with Kyle, we looked more like an aunt and her nephew than a mother and son. We watched a musical in Broadway, and the curtain went up, and the lights went out. Only the stage was brightly lit, and we watched the show holding hands. As we immersed ourselves in the performance, it seemed that Kyle's mood was gradually becoming brighter. We went into a Western restaurant in Haiwadong Alley, with bright lights known for its good steak. Kyle's face was much brighter than before the show. Kyle had his first beer after entering college, and I felt a different emotion that I had never felt before. Handsome Kyle attracted attention wherever he went. Under the restaurant lights, Kyle's face shone even brighter, and during the meal, I harbored a thought that I shouldn't have. To be honest, that was the first time I felt a manly scent from Kyle. When he realized my skirt was short, he took off his jacket and covered my knees. His mannerism reminded me of my husband, and I burst into tears. Kyle, startled, said, "Mom, it's a happy day today. You came out with me to help me relieve my stress, and we had such a good time. Why are you like this?" and comforted me. I had missed my husband so much, but I had never shown it in front of Kyle. However, that day I couldn't hold back my emotions. We barely finished the meal, and I managed to put on a smile as we returned home. Kyle came into the master bedroom, slightly unzipped my dress, and went to his room. Kyle returned in 2 days, and I immersed myself in work. Even during my busy schedule, I found myself smiling involuntarily, thinking of Kyle's warm hand held during the musical. The next incident with Kyle was during his next leave. It was in the winter when Kyle was 22. At that time, there was a movie achieving record-breaking success, and I was saving it to watch with Kyle. Kyle was adapting to military life, and he looked happier than when he first came out on leave. I purposely suggested watching the movie at a downtown cinema, and Kyle complied. We bought a popcorn set, entered the cinema, and sat in the couple's seat, focusing on the movie while eating popcorn. Occasionally, I rested my head on Kyle's shoulder, and he naturally lent it to me. At that time, I felt a slight flutter in my heart from Kyle's arm around my shoulder. I don't even remember how I watched the movie because my heart was pounding. I was hoping the movie wouldn't end, and that Kyle wouldn't hear my fast-beating heart. Kyle eats anything well. I like seafood, so we went to a shellfish specialty restaurant, ordered a hot pot and salad, and had beer with it. That day, I found out for the first time how sweet beer could be. Kyle is weak to alcohol, but after drinking 3 shots, I don't know why his red cheeks looked so cute. We had various conversations, ordered more side dishes and beer, and went home. After each of us took a shower and sat down in the living room watching the news, Kyle said, "I want to sleep next to you tonight." I replied, "Okay, let's sleep together. I've been lonely sleeping alone every day without your dad." But I knew what Kyle meant. That night, a healthy son, and a young stepmother spent a very satisfying night. Several weeks passed after that day, until the day Kyle went out for a sleepover. I flipped through Kyle's album, thinking only of Kyle. The next time he had a sleepover, we naturally fell asleep in the same room without anyone making the first move. Looking at the picture of Kyle's dad hanging on the bedroom wall, I felt sorry, but I also felt a warm feeling as if he would understand me. Before I knew it, it was summer, and on the day Kyle came, we went on a date in short shorts. I was confident about my figure, and Kyle seemed to like my outfit. When we got home, we naturally slept in the same space at night, and I even bought new underwear to accept Kyle. Kyle said he was able to finish his military service well. Thanks to me, on the day he was discharged, and he bought chrysanthemum flowers and paid a visit to his father's charnel house. I closed my eyes and told my husband that he must be watching from heaven what I'm doing, and I hope he understands me, and if possible forgives me. Kyle, who had completed his military duty, helped me with my work before returning to school. To others, he is a son who listens well to his mother and is well-mannered. But only I know our big secret, so we were always happy. Who could have imagined that there is a stepmother who spends the night with her stepson born to her husband's ex-wife? I know well that I can't keep living like this with Kyle. If Kyle gets a new girlfriend, I'll welcome it any time. Sometimes I want to be a cool stepmother giving love advice. When Kyle and I feel lonely, who can say anything if we find each other? Even if people criticize our relationship and throw stones at us, I think we can handle it well.
Tyson Summers finalized the last set of documents provided by Jason, crucial for Jason's management of a specific portfolio, among the largest under Ty's responsibility. This portfolio included the holdings of Wilson Graves, a billionaire investor and entrepreneur affectionately called Willie Graves. Willie thrived on using his wealth for hostile takeovers, acquiring stocks to gain control. Upon success, Willie's strategy involved rapid divestment to enhance his investment's value and involve other trusting individuals. Damn those who got hurt. Serving as Willie's lawyer and legal adversary, Ty successfully maintained Wilson's honesty and kept him out of trouble with the SEC and other federal regulators scrutinizing individuals like Graves. This allowed Willie to amass more wealth, benefiting Summers, Reinhart, and Haynes Incan. Jason also made strides in managing portfolios for his other clients, aiming to gain full control within the remaining 2 weeks. This would conclude the 3-month process of transferring all of Ty's clients, excluding his special clients. Only Jason, Stacy, Reinhart, and Clayton Haynes were privy to Ty's impending retirement. Ty reminded himself once more that it was time to let go and prioritize personal time. As one of the founding fathers of the firm, along with Stacy and Clay, they transformed it from a small storefront law firm into one of Columbus, Ohio's largest and most influential. However, this success took a toll on Ty's personal life, impacting both his marriage to Bridget and their family. Celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary last month, Ty and Bridget had 2 children, 19-year-old Jake and 18-year-old Tessa, both thriving in college. Despite the material comforts, Ty realized that Bridget's disinterest in their love life was a significant issue. While Ty's lovemaking drive remained active, Bridget attributed her low libido to a temporary phase, promising to discuss it with her doctor during her next checkup, which was almost a year ago. Their love life hadn't improved, and Ty, frustrated, chose to let the matter rest without further discussion. The source of his concern was Bridget's frequent trips back to her hometown of Mansfield, Ohio. She explained it was due to her mother's declining health, and her sister Bianca, who lived there, needed assistance. Both still resided in Mansfield, and Bianca, divorced and alone, benefited from Bridget's stay during these visits. Bridget felt it was the least she could do to relieve Bianca and allow her some free time. These trips started 6 months ago and now occurred bi-weekly, with Bridget departing on Thursday morning and returning late Sunday night. She maintained communication by calling every evening at 9 and ensuring her cell was always accessible. However, this meant Ty spent 3 or 4 days alone every other week, a situation he now disliked. Bridget left this morning for her latest trip, leaving Ty alone again. Despite his disappointment, he revealed to Bridget that he was working on a big surprise, ready in a couple of weeks. He even attempted to pique her interest by mentioning Stacy's involvement, hoping her curiosity or even jealousy over Stacy would make her stay and find out the secret. Bridget showed minimal curiosity, and Ty, not surprised, let it go and left her to packing. After their usual goodbyes, Ty left for work, knowing she would be gone within the hour. Later that day, Ty closed up his office, chatted with Rachel, his secretary, and walked down the carpeted hall to Stacy's office for a conversation before heading home. He knocked once and pushed the door open, a habit accepted by all partners accustomed to his unannounced visits. Ty greeted Stacy and suggested they finish work for the day, offering to buy a drink. Stacy expressed her reluctance to go home to an empty house. Another colleague, Roger, was waiting for her as they planned to attend their son's school play, where Roger Jr. had the lead role in Pirates of Doom. Ty teased Stacy about the play, but acknowledged that parents are naturally biased when it comes to their children's performances. Stacy laughed and agreed. At 46, happily married for the past 10 years, she reassured Ty about the progress on the project and declined assistance from Jason, noting that everything was on track. Concerned about Ty's upcoming retirement, Stacy expressed her wish to talk him out of it, emphasizing that he had been the driving force behind the company's success. Ty complimented Stacy's contributions and assured her that she, along with Clay and the younger team members, would continue to excel. He praised the younger generation's dedication, particularly mentioning Jason and expressing the possibility of offering Alice Chambers a partnership in the future. Stacy expressed her liking for Jason and Alice and mentioned that Raj would also attend the upcoming party. Ty welcomed Raj and bid Stacy goodnight, planning to see her the next day. Ty drove to his estate home in the Columbus suburbs, situated on a 5-acre lot and encompassing just over 5,000 scaff. It featured a hot tub flowing into a pool, a cabana, 2 tennis courts, and a spacious garden with flowers and flowering shrubs, providing color throughout the summer and into the fall. With the departure of the kids, Bridget had let go of the cook and maid, leaving the house mostly empty. Acknowledging that it was too large for the two of them, Bridget agreed they hadn't committed to it, but suggested it was time to consider moving into something smaller. Maybe they should give it a couple more years, she proposed. Ty parked in the 4-car garage and entered the kitchen, where he placed a frozen dinner in the microwave before changing into casual clothes for the evening. Returning down the steps, he heard the landline ring, hoping it was related to one of his ads, as it was too early for Bridget to call. Answering the call, he was pleased to discuss his boat, a 32-foot powered sailboat moored at Lake Erie in the summer and fall, winter stored at a facility on the lake. After a fruitful discussion with someone who had taken the boat for a run with the marina owner covering for Ty, the deal was finalized. An agreement was made to send a cashier's check for the agreed-upon price to a post office box number Ty provided. Once the check was received, the title to the boat would be available at the marina. The purchaser had reviewed the title when taking the boat out for a trial run. Everything was in place. Bridget, who had never liked the boat and hadn't been out with Ty in years, would be pleased. With the boat sold and his Jaguar and Audi promised to successful high bidders, there was little left to worry about. 2 weeks from today, everything would be in place for his retirement. The house might take time to sell, but by then, Ty and Bridget would be in the smaller bungalow, ready for showings. He had already moved some furniture there, and any additional pieces could be purchased as needed. Ty mechanically consumed the frozen dinner and decided to relax with mindless TV and snacks. Taking a bottle of cold Miller Lite to the entertainment room, he opted for adult content, contemplating the lack of imagination in the scenes as the actors repeated the same actions in the same way. The movie failed to arouse him enough to take matters into his own hands. While the film unfolded, Ty pondered why the actors all followed the same script, gazing into the camera without any imaginative flair, merely aiming for titillation. He lacked the enthusiasm to engage in personal activities. At 9, Bridget phoned, and Ty answered, asking about any issues getting there. Bridget assured him of an easy trip and mentioned that her mom was doing a little better, but her sister Bianca was stressed. She suggested staying an extra day if it was okay with Ty. Despite feeling a clench in his stomach, Ty dismissed the discomfort and agreed, telling Bridget to do what she thought was best. He mentioned that he would stay at work a little longer, as it was lonely without her. Ty also inquired about Monday, asking if she needed anything and noting that she didn't take much with her. Bridget explained that she had things left behind and assured Ty that she would be fine. She then brought up the surprise he had mentioned earlier, expressing anticipation to find out what it was. Ty, somewhat surprised by her interest, informed her that it was right on schedule, with Stacy almost done with her part and the rest already in place. Bridget promised to call him tomorrow night and said goodnight, ending the call with a simple, "I love you." Observing Bridget's eagerness to end the calls quickly, Ty noted that she didn't reciprocate his "I love you" with more than a good night. Despite this, he smiled, attributing her quick endings to her potential busyness with her mother. Ty then reflected on Bridget's family dynamics, noting the dysfunction and his own lack of fondness for her mother and sister Bianca, who had been divorced for cheating. So, the rest of my weekend alone continues, Ty thought to himself to occupy himself. He called the kids, talked with them for an hour or more, reminding them of his summons for them to come down in 2 weeks, and then just let himself go. He fell asleep on the couch and woke during the middle of the night with a stiff neck. He went to bed and slept without dreams. That was unusual, but Ty welcomed it. Lately, his dreams had not been pleasant. The next 2 weeks passed as normal, with Ty working to finish all his cases and make sure Jason was up to speed on all of them. He spent most of that second week calling his clients and letting them know of his pending retirement. They were, for the most part, happy for him and willing to work with Jason. A few wanted assurances from either Stacy or Clayton, and he made sure they were contacted right away. Things were all in place by that final Thursday when Bridget left for Mansfield. Ty had managed to keep his pending retirement secret from Bridget as planned. She rarely asked about his work anymore, so it was not much of a problem. In addition, she had forgotten about the surprise, and Ty didn't bring it up again before she left. He would mention it Sunday morning when she called to tell him she was about to leave, especially if she decided to stay an extra day again. Either way, Ty was prepared. Friday marked Ty's ultimate day, filled with bustling activity. Collaborating with Rachel, they cleaned the house and transferred paper files to Jason. Following a few more phone calls, Ty instructed Rachel to shift all his new calls to Jason, aligning with his plan. Having assigned Jason his secretary, Rachel had experience working with her. Ty's last morning task was telling Stacy to set things in motion, and she affirmed readiness. Though she left for the courthouse later that morning, Stacy promised to return in time for the retirement party at the Radisson Hotel. Despite everyone knowing Bridget couldn't attend, it didn't delay the proceedings, promising an enjoyable time. Ty left immediately after lunch to address several necessary tasks, and by 3 that afternoon, everything was in place. The final papers for the house were signed, and movers were already on their way, committed to finishing by late Saturday afternoon. Once the movers finished, the crew Ty hired to clean the place thoroughly would arrive, with orders to complete the task by that evening. They were promised a bonus if they finished on time. Realtors assured Ty that the "For Sale" sign would be in the front yard by late tomorrow, revealing a listing of interested parties who wished to view the property starting the following Monday. To their satisfaction, Ty had competitively priced it for a quick sale. The last task for Ty was ensuring that all financial arrangements were in place. Bridget and he had 2 separate accounts, aside from the joint ones, each with their credit card. It was Ty's insistence that they carried only 1 card each, disapproving of running a credit balance. Bridget, adept at financial management, was never frivolous with money. She skillfully managed their accounts, aware of Ty's private business accounts managed by his company. Unaware of Ty's accounts at the firm, Bridget, over the years, had neither inquired nor remembered. Retiring, Ty closed all joint accounts carrying both their names, transferring the retirement account to a new brokerage. Ty intended to manage all their joint affairs in cash temporarily, or at least until they had settled on everything. Since the new home would be located outside the States, Ty moved the accounts beyond the U.S., having already opened an online account with an international bank with outlets in Europe and South America. Ty was confident that Bridget would easily adapt to the change, as she was very intelligent about money matters. Finally, Ty confirmed that the tickets were in hand, contemplating spending the next several months with Bridget in a beautiful Costa Rican resort. Sun, sand, swimming, sailing, horseback riding, they had it all. Ty, having made a solo trip to the resort to confirm its authenticity, instructed Rachel to book the trip and make the reservations, desiring everything to be confirmed by the time of his retirement. Tyson was quite prosperous, accumulating substantial wealth from handling high-profile cases for affluent clients, charging accordingly. His clients, recognizing his expertise, retained him with substantial retainers. Ty invested his earnings in high-risk accounts, yielding significant returns over the years. As a lawyer, he leveraged his legal knowledge to move most of his money into offshore accounts legally, without any agreements with the U.S. These accounts remained intact, unbeknownst to Bridget, adding an element of surprise. If she were aware, she would be astonished at their value. Importantly, this money was outside the states, not subject to U.S. tax laws or the U.S. courts, had ensured everyone in the firm kept it quiet. Despite Bridget suggesting retirement, it had been dropped over the past year. Ty believed his retirement would please her, given her complaints about the time he spent at work. He informed everyone that it would be a surprise for Bridget, with plans to announce everything on Sunday night when she returned. Ty was confident she would be home Sunday, intending to initiate the surprise during her morning call. So far, everything had gone perfectly. The party was enjoyable, with Ty dancing with all the women and talking to all the men, sharing war stories of their most interesting cases. Jason spent most of his time around Ty, ensuring nothing important escaped his notice. Ty thought highly of Jason, foreseeing him as a valuable asset to the firm. Stacy and Clay, privy to all his plans, were sworn to secrecy. As his attorneys, Stacy subtly expressed pleasure in what he was doing. Ty danced with her, discussing the final steps. Stacy assured Ty that everything was ready for the surprise, documenting checks and amounts to ensure Bridget's surprise and Ty's satisfaction. Ty expressed confidence in Bridget enjoying the surprise, and Stacy sarcastically whispered her agreement. Ty laughed and shared that he had tickets for a Costa Rica resort with plans to leave Sunday night. He promised to call her with a permanent number, but mentioned that his new cell would be active in the meantime. He suggested Roger and Stacy do something similar. Stacy replied that she enjoyed what she was doing too much to quit at the moment. Ty encouraged her to tell Clay that he was sorry for not including him in all their plans. Ty stayed at the party until almost midnight before leaving. He missed Bridget's call, but found a voicemail. Bridget informed Ty that she was going to her mom's that night, asking him not to call her there to avoid waking her mother. She explained that her mother was tired all the time and needed rest. Bridget promised to call the next night and asked Ty to be home. She bid him good night. As Ty expected, she wouldn't call tonight after leaving her message. He spent the evening packing his clothes and ensuring Bridget's belongings were neatly packed. With limited time before Sunday night, Ty aimed to avoid return trips after the movers finished tomorrow. Careful and methodical, he packed her things, ensuring a smooth process without room for complaints. He planned to stay at the bungalow tonight and ensure all calls were forwarded to his new cell, starting tomorrow. Once he had transferred everything to the bungalow, Ty wrapped up his tasks, made a phone call to confirm the last piece of the surprise was in place, and then went to bed. Pleasantly tired from the party and on edge, he hoped nothing would go wrong as he fell asleep. Saturday marked the packing and moving of the furniture from their home. Though somewhat sad, Ty shrugged his shoulders and left the movers to their work. He was going back to the bungalow to meet their kids, arriving right around noon, and Ty needed to go over his plans with them to avoid surprising them too much. He had given them a hint of his retirement, but withheld details about Costa Rica or anything else. Now was the time to bring them up to date. He had to extract promises from them not to call Bridget and spoil his surprise, thinking they would be okay with that. When they arrived, he welcomed them inside, sat them down to begin filling them in. Making it short and to the point, he answered all their questions and gave details when they asked for them. Neither Jake nor Tessa were happy with what he was doing, but he assured them that their college tuition was taken care of and that they would always be welcome home, wherever that was. He reassured them that his retirement was something both he and Bridget had discussed and agreed upon as the right time. They wanted to talk to Bridget, but he made them promise to wait until Sunday night. When she got home, they finally agreed. They all went out to dinner that evening and kept quiet when Ty answered the 9 o'clock call from Bridget. She kept it short, as usual, but didn't mention staying any longer, so he still expected her. Sunday night, after the call, the kids once again discussed his plans, wanting to be sure he still wanted to proceed. Ty assured them he was fine. When they went to sleep in the spare room with twin beds, he made a phone call to confirm the movers were done, and the cleaning crew was scheduled. Both were affirmative, and Ty was pleased. One final call, and he was done for the night. Sunday was a day when little had to be done, and most everything was ready. He checked the house and found all in place. The movers and cleaners had left the place spotless and ready to show. He drove back to the bungalow and waited for the call from Bridget, telling him she was ready to leave. He expected her to call at her normal time, between 10 and 10:30. The kids had gone out to be with some of their friends from home, so Ty was alone when she called. He answered after the first ring. Ty nervously asked Bridget if she was ready to start for home. She responded that she was just beginning and explained that she would like to stay a few more days to give her sister Bianca more time to do some things. Bridget's voice was strained, as if she expected Ty to object, well aware that he would not like her request. Ty heard the words, and for the first time felt the anger that he had been holding in check for the past several months, struggling to break free. She wanted to stay a few days longer. Why? Well, he knew now, didn't he? He had known for over 3 months now, long enough to begin planning his surprise. Now was the time to bring his surprise to the front. Now it was time to do what he had planned for the past 3 months. Once he found out for sure, now it was time. As he reached this decision, Ty's anger finally surfaced, having kept it in check for so long. With the anger making it difficult to speak without shouting, he responded to Bridget's request by expressing that he wouldn't mind her spending a few more nights, sarcastically referring to her lover, Kevin. Ty confronted her about her involvement with both Kevin and another man, Ben, stating that it bothered him. His voice rose in anger, and he struggled to restrain himself from screaming at her. Ty accused her of carrying on these relationships for the past 6 months or longer, expressing his frustration at having to pretend it was nothing. Silence followed from the other end, broken only by a sob, and then the phone went dead. Ty stared at the phone in his hand, as if it were a snake about to strike. He realized that Bridget had hung up, and that was an unexpected surprise. He finally placed the offending instrument on the table, his hand trembling with remaining anger. She hung up, and he had no outlet for his pent-up anger. As Ty slumped into the chair beside the table, his phone rang sharply. He stared at it uncomprehendingly as the sound reverberated from the walls. The disposable phone he had purchased for this purpose continued to ring, not having voicemail. Finally picking it up, he pushed the talk button. Yes, was all he could get out. His anger had burned out with the sudden end of it all. He had been primed for an argument or a shouting match, a screaming match between the cheating wife and her scorned husband. Her abrupt termination caught him by surprise and extinguished his anger like a bucket of water on a flame. Now he was numb, dead inside, and numb with the pain he had been holding back with his plan of action. Without the cathartic outlet for his anger and hurt, he was suddenly helpless to stop the piercing pain that clutched at his heart. Bianca's angry voice came through the tiny speaker, urging Ty not to hang up and expressing concern for Bridget, who was described as a wreck and almost hysterical. She questioned Ty about what he had said to Bridget and what he had done to cause her extreme reaction. Ty redirected his anger towards Bianca, viewing her as a full partner in Bridget's betrayal and as guilty as his cheating wife. He sarcastically informed Bianca that he had simply told Bridget to stay as long as she liked, to spend extra time with her lover, Kevin Clark. Ty accused both Bianca and Bridget of being involved with Ben Stinson and Kevin, detailing their rendezvous at a motel. He expressed anger, stopping himself from screaming at Bianca, and dismissed her plea for him to let Bridget explain. Bianca tried to defend Bridget, insisting it wasn't what Ty thought, and describing the situation as a stupid mistake for which she was equally at fault. She pleaded with Ty not to do anything drastic and urged him to wait until Bridget could talk to him. Ty, however, remained adamant, revealing that someone would be there when Bridget arrived, but it wouldn't be him. He accused Bridget of discarding their marriage and stated that she wanted to continue the affair with Kevin. Despite Bianca's pleas, Ty informed her that he had already told their children about the situation, including the weekends when Bridget claimed to be taking care of her mother. Ty asserted that the children had taken the news surprisingly well. In response to Bianca's desperate appeal for hope and reconsideration, Ty reiterated that it was Bridget and Bianca who had discarded their family. Ty bid goodbye to Bianca and mentioned saying goodbye to her mother, noting that she never liked him, and now she must be laughing her skinny buns off. Ty disconnected, then looked around the small bungalow for the last time. Bridget will love it, he thought to himself. Then he laughed at the thought. He turned off all the lights, put the spare keys on the table along with the letter to Bridget, and went out the front door. He pulled the door shut, got into his rental car, and drove to Rachel's apartment. She was waiting in front of the building for him as he pulled up. He got out, loaded her 3 suitcases into the back of the car, and then held the door as she climbed in. She smiled up at him as he shut the car door. He walked around to the driver's side and slid in. Rachel expressed her readiness for the situation, mentioning the challenge of seeing him every day at the firm without being able to touch or talk to him. She credited Bridget for throwing Ty away, allowing her to snap him up and enjoy their weekends together. They drove away from Bridget's story, and Rachel revealed that when she called Ty to ask if he minded her staying a couple more days, she had a strange feeling that it might not be a good idea. She shared her conversation with Bianca, who laughed at the idea of spending more nights with Kevin and Ben. Rachel admitted feeling a twinge of guilt when thinking about her time with both of them, but that guilt failed to survive her thoughts of lust. She described a thrill of wetness between her legs when recalling the moments with Kevin and Ben. I shuddered once and picked up the phone. The conversation started as usual, Ty asking me if I was coming home. He sounded so normal, reminding me that this was a world that Ty knew nothing about, and that gave me courage to do what I knew I wanted. I went for it, asking him if he minded if I stayed a couple of days. I looked at Bianca when I did, and her grin reassured me that I was doing the right thing. As I waited for his normal answer to do whatever made me happy, I thought once again to myself that Ty wouldn't mind, and he would never know what I was really doing. I would never let him find out because it would hurt him too much. I loved Ty. That was real. But lovemaking with him had lost its appeal to me, and now I had found an outlet that allowed me to continue to love my husband, but enjoy lovemaking with someone else. With him, I had found a wild side to myself that I never expected. I was thoroughly caught up in the illicit pleasure he gave me. I was pleased at myself, my own pleasure driving my lust to spend just 1 or even 2 more nights with Kevin and Ben. I was already imagining our night together, and I was becoming warm at the thought, until those words came out of the speaker and directly to my gut, destroying my world. Ty questioned why he should mind Bridget wanting to spend more nights with her lover Kevin, mentioning her involvement with both him and another guy, Ben. Ty expressed uncertainty about the duration, wondering if it had been 6 months or longer. He conveyed his frustration, feeling like he was supposed to pretend it was nothing. Bridget couldn't speak in response to Ty's accusations. I was frozen in fear and panic. I slammed the phone down, and I let out a loud sob. Just one, that's all. I was able to get out before it all became clear to me. Oh God, he knew, and my life was over. I was going to lose the only man I ever loved. I had to get home. I had to leave now to catch him before he had time to do something terrible. I grabbed my car keys and ran out of Bianca's kitchen. I started my car and backed out of her drive. I turned and headed toward the interstate and home. I had to get home. I had to. The drive usually took me 3.5 to 4 hours to make, but now I was pushing my car as fast as it would go. I was immune to any threat from the police who patrolled the interstate, and I cared nothing for speed limits. I had to get home before Ty had time to leave me. I had to talk to him, tell him that I loved him, and that I was a fool. I had done something stupid and selfish, but it didn't mean anything to me. Kevin and Ben were already gone. I'd never see them or Bianca again as long as I lived. I would tell him that I would give up everyone else if he would stay with me. Over and over, I rehearsed the words I would use to persuade him not to throw me away. I was seduced by Bianca and her lifestyle, and the lack of my lovemaking drive was a problem that she told me would disappear if I let myself go with someone who I didn't have to please or who I didn't care about. She convinced me that this would reawaken my lovemaking drive and that Ty would benefit. I was just going to try to get my drive back. But then I was seduced by the lust and the thrill of doing something nasty. It would revive me, and I would carry that back to my marriage bed with my husband. I was pleased at that. It would work. Ty would listen. He had to. 100 miles later, I asked the question Ty would ask. Why didn't any of that lust carry over? Why had we not made love in those 6 months since I had begun my affair? That was a question I had no answer for. I had to think of one. I had to think. I was still trying to find the words to answer that question. When I pulled into the driveway of our home, I was surprised to see 4 cars sitting in our driveway. I recognized the 2 cars belonging to my children, and I was surprised to see them there. But almost as quickly, a feeling of dread crept over me at their presence. I drove around them onto the grass and slid to a stop and clambered out of my car to run toward the house. As I did, I saw someone get out of one of the strange cars and move to intercept me at the front door. I ignored this man and reached for my keys. He tried to stop me, but I pushed him aside and slid my key into the lock. It didn't work. I tried again, over and over, but it wouldn't work. I threw it on the porch and held my face in my hands and began crying. I turned to the door and began pounding on it with my fists. I pounded until the pain in my hands forced me to stop. I looked around to see the man who got out of the car still standing there. He asked me if I was Mrs. Tyson Summers, and I nodded my head yes. He handed me an envelope and said in a low voice, "You are served, madam." He then took another, smaller envelope and handed that to me. "These are the keys to your new residence. The address is inside, and the property is yours without burden. You will find the deed and the necessary information inside." I took both envelopes and just stared at him. My mind was numb with sadness and pain. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a legal-sized white envelope. This contains several checks amounting to the current savings and checking accounts, which have been closed. This house has been listed for sale, and the proceeds will go to you once the sale is completed. All of this is included in the divorce statements, and the terms are spelled out very clearly. The man closed his briefcase and prepared to leave. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. "In case you've forgotten, this is the name of your husband's attorney." He moved away and got into his car. He spoke to the person sitting in the other car I didn't recognize before backing out and leaving. I was stunned. Holding the envelopes that the man had given me, I glanced down at the business card and saw that it was Stacy Reinhardt. That name caused a bolt of anger to course down my back, but it quickly died. Stacy was a problem only in my own head. I knew that, but I had used it over the years as a wedge to make Ty feel guilty. Now I knew better. But it didn't help to look up and see her walking toward me. "Hello, Bridget. You're not looking so well today. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Ty asked me to handle things in his absence. In case you're wondering and have lots of questions, I can give you some answers. First, Ty retired effective Friday. We all had a party for him. It was a great party, and lots of people came to see him off. Too bad you missed it. But then, you had other things more important, didn't you? Second, this house has been turned over to a realtor for sale. You signed your name to a power of attorney some time ago, and Ty used it to transfer the title into his name. But don't worry, the proceeds are all for you. Ty left it to you in the divorce. He also bought you a nice bungalow, paid for and furnished. Your children can take you there. Finally, Ty gave me full power to act in his behalf in the divorce and all his affairs here in the States. Ty has left the country, and I believe it is his intention not to return for some time." She stood there watching me as I digested the things she told me. It was as if each was a hammer that pounded the stake in my heart deeper and deeper. I was almost gasping for breath at the suddenness with which my life had collapsed in on me. I opened my mouth to ask questions, but nothing came out. I realized that I was smacked by a man whom I had blindly betrayed and disrespected so easily. A man that I knew in my heart was the only man I could ever love. Now I had lost his love, and I had no idea what to do. Suddenly, I was more alone than I had been over the last 20 years. I had my children and my life, but my anchor to all I cared about in this world had left me. I had never felt so alone in my life. I can't know why you did this to Tyson, Bridget. I know from working with him for the last 15 years that he loved you and his children more than anything in this life. When he found out what you were doing, it almost homicided him. Roger and I helped him through the crisis he was in and made sure he stayed calm enough to make plans to deal with you. We made sure he didn't do anything foolish. Just so you know, he considered self-damage, but we talked him out of it by reminding him of your children. He's with someone else. Now that also helped him through the crisis you caused by your actions. It's not important who she is, just that she is with him and will care for him as this slowly runs its course. Tyson will not agree to talk to you, and he doesn't care if you fight the divorce. That will be in my hands, not his. So do what you will. Just know that Tyson is out of your life and will never be back. She turned and walked back to her car. Without looking back, she got into the passenger side of the car, and it left. I walked slowly down the drive to my children, who were standing together beside the cars. I had to face them and listen to their anger and condemnation. But I really didn't care anymore. I had betrayed my husband, their father, and I had lost him, and nothing else mattered. Their anger at me would not make any difference. Nothing they could say or do could hurt any more than the words I heard from Ty just that morning. God, how they hurt. And all he did was state the truth as he saw it. As I stopped in front of Jake and Tessa, my grief brought me to my knees. Jake reached down and helped me to stand, but there was no concern on his face. As I looked at him, I saw anger, disgust, disappointment, but no concern. That was painful to me, and I began to sob. And instead of holding me, my daughter stood in front of me with her arms crossed over her chest and her face mirroring that of her brother. I had told myself that I couldn't hurt any worse after losing Ty in my marriage. But the looks on the faces of my children told me in no uncertain terms exactly how they saw what I did, and it was even worse. I cried for what I had lost. As my children stood by and waited, they offered no comfort. I had lost them as well. I turned and looked once more at the home Ty and I had purchased to build our family. I loved that house and had always felt pride when I came home. Now it was gone. Everything was gone. My husband, my marriage, the love of my children, and the home we shared. What have I done? Why did I never think of the consequences of my actions? Why had I never considered that? I knew now consequences are a whinge. I realized it was time to wrap things up and leave the master control booth before someone showed up to shut me down. If I acted quickly, I could switch off the live assist mode and return the system to its fully automated broadcast mode. Our local TV audience had seen enough for the night. Once I had the system running normally again, I could leave and grab a drink. I really needed one. I also understood that there would be consequences to face. Consequences at home and from the general manager and FCC once they pieced it all together and came after me. But I was already feeling like I was in a bad situation, so I didn't care anymore. Like I said, I needed a drink. I headed to Frankie's on Roswell Road, a popular local sports bar, and ordered a beer. I sat there watching the end of the Monday night football game while having a few more beers. There was a lot of chatter in the bar, and I knew what it was about. I couldn't catch everything, but I heard enough to know I had accomplished my goal. I had stirred up conversation. Luckily, nobody pulled me into their discussions, so I drank alone in silence while witnessing the Saints dominating the Falcons. By the time 10:30 p.m. rolled around, I was feeling numb. The game had ended, and my team had lost. New Orleans 23, Atlanta 3. It seemed like the Saints were particularly motivated, perhaps because it was their first game back in their stadium since the hurricane, and they completely outplayed the Falcons. Our station aired the game alongside ESPN because we were one of the teams involved. I inquired with the bartender about leaving my car in the parking lot overnight, and he agreed it was a wise decision given my condition. Recognizing my state, he arranged for a cab since I resided just a short distance away in a pleasant residential area of Sandy Springs. So, that's pretty much the conclusion of the story, and I suppose I should begin at the start to give you a clear picture of how I ended up in this situation. My name is Richard Head, but my friends call me Dick. I work as a broadcast engineer for WBDK, a local CBS affiliate in Atlanta, Georgia. I hold a graduate degree from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science, and I also obtained a second degree in broadcast technologies. Needless to say, I'm highly qualified in my field and have held several challenging positions. I've been working in the industry for 22 years, with stints at various television stations along the East Coast, before settling in Atlanta for the past 5 years. If you're curious about my appearance, I'm 46 years old with dark hair that's graying at the temples. I've never felt the need to conceal the gray, but I do apply a bit of dye to my small mustache to keep it from showing any signs of gray. I stand at 6'3" and weigh around 190 pounds, although I haven't stepped on a scale in quite some time. I'd say I'm moderately attractive, though I wouldn't compare myself to Mel Gibson or Richard Gere. You'll notice I didn't mention any younger actors, primarily because I'm not familiar with many of their names, and also because I'm not in the same age bracket, so it wouldn't be relevant. Anyway, I consider myself good-looking, but I'm not the type you'd see in a romance novel. My wife Sharon and I have been married for 22 years, and we have 2 daughters, Melanie and Stephanie. Melanie is married, while Stephanie is a senior in college. Sharon stands around 5 inches tall, weighing no more than 135 lbs, with long blonde hair that reaches her shoulders. She's incredibly attractive, with a figure that catches attention, and she's one of the sweetest women I've ever known. It's hard to find someone who doesn't like her. For the past 18 months, Sharon has been working as a secretary for our pastor, Reverend Bob Shelter. Now, on to the story. Last Friday, I had some extra time for lunch and decided to surprise Sharon by taking her out to lunch. I parked near the side entrance of the church offices due to the rain. When I arrived, she wasn't in her office, but I decided to walk in anyway. As I stood there, I overheard Sharon speaking to Pastor Bob in his office. She mentioned how excited she was for Monday night, expressing anticipation about spending time together due to my work covering the Monday night football games. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Their conversation turned intimate, with talk of booking a room at the La Quinta Inn and expressing longing for physical intimacy. Hearing this filled me with shock, nausea, and rising anger. I knew I had to leave before I did something rash. It was a struggle to walk away, but I couldn't bring myself to confront them in that moment. Despite my desire to confront them, I feared I might act impulsively and regret it later. I slipped out the same way I came in, hoping they hadn't noticed my presence. They had security cameras, but I entered through a side door they likely didn't monitor. As I drove away, it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. I was so shaken that I knew I wouldn't be productive for the rest of the day, so I called the station to let them know I wasn't feeling well and would be heading home. I needed time to gather my thoughts, and home seemed like the best place for that. Sharon wouldn't be home until after 4 p.m., so I had plenty of time to contemplate. It was evident that Sharon was having an affair with Pastor Bob. I decided he would no longer be my pastor. In my mind, he became Bastard Bob, a fitting alteration. I needed to understand the extent of their relationship, how long it had been going on, and why it had started. While some people might prefer not to know these details, I was not one of them. I desperately wanted to understand why this had happened in my seemingly wonderful marriage. Clearly, Sharon didn't view our marriage as I did, and she wasn't the person I thought she was. I resolved to uncover everything I needed to know and address the situation head-on. I wasn't weak, and I would handle both of them accordingly. Once home, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on the patio to gather my thoughts. The pleasant weather and fresh air helped me clear my mind as I contemplated the situation. I knew I would eventually figure it all out. I just needed to calm myself. I won't deny shedding a few tears that afternoon. While I understood that I didn't own Sharon or her body, it was devastating to think she would be intimate with another man, or men, after vowing herself to me on our wedding day. While some might not take those vows seriously, I certainly did, and I believed she did too. Experiencing something like that prompts you to question your entire set of values and wonder if you've been naive your whole life to believe in fidelity and love, along with all that accompanies it. The most damaging aspect of having a cheating partner isn't just the act of infidelity itself. It's the loss of belief in them and everything they say or do. You lose trust in them, the very foundation of your marriage, leaving you feeling exposed and afraid. Despite being 6'3" tall and weighing 190 pounds, I felt vulnerable and scared. It highlights how severely a cheating spouse can affect someone, knocking them down like nothing else could. As I sat there grappling with my emotions, striving to remain composed and rational so I could process everything, I realized there were past doubts I had dismissed due to my trust in Sharon. These seemingly insignificant issues, now accumulated, formed a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach as I pieced it all together. How could I have been so blind? Trust, that's how. I had placed my trust in her. Today that trust was shattered, and all those minor clues had merged into a burden that would be hard to bear. I needed facts. That's what I craved. I wanted to understand why this happened, how long it had been going on, how frequent it was, where it took place, and who else was involved. My trust was obliterated, but I was determined to uncover the answers I needed. I realized my marriage was a facade, and I would confront that reality. But first, I needed clarity. Unwilling to face Sharon yet without revealing my suspicions, I left the house at 3 p.m. to avoid being there when she returned. I drove into town, stopped at the station to gather some essentials for the next few days, and briefly spoke with my boss about needing time off early in the week to deal with personal matters. He seemed understanding, so I headed to Frankie's to pass the time until I had to return home. At 5 p.m., I called Sharon to let her know I'd be stopping somewhere for a while and wouldn't be home for dinner. She expressed annoyance, mentioning she was feeling aroused and had plans for the evening, but if I stopped, those plans would be off the table. Yeah, like I'd want that aroused state caused by Bastard Bob. She might be in the mood, but it's because of him, not me. She can satisfy herself for all I care. I told her, "Sweetheart, I've already planned to stop by, so just stay excited for me, and I'll take care of you when I get back." I knew that would stir her up. She replied, "Don't count on it, pal. If you think you can treat me like that, you won't be getting any action for a while." To myself, I thought that's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to touch her again until I found out what was going on, and maybe never again. I arrived home around 10:30 p.m., pretty drunk, but not too drunk to notice the bedroom door locked. I smirked and banged on the door, figuring she was awake. I shouted, "Fine, if that's how you want it, don't expect me to tend to your needs. Just suffer." Then I headed for the spare bedroom, knowing she'd be furious. It would give me a break from explaining why I didn't want to be intimate with her. The next morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee when I walked in. I could feel the chill in the air as her stare pierced me. If I hadn't known about her infidelity, her look would have sent shivers down my spine. I grinned at her and said, "No need to get up and make breakfast, honey. I'll grab something on my way to golf." I left through the kitchen door, tossed my clubs in the trunk, and drove off. Shortly after, my phone rang. Seeing it was her, I ignored it. A few minutes later, I checked the message. She was furious. "You jerk! How could you do this to me? Get back here right now." Bastard? No, that was Bastard Bob, not me. If anyone deserved that title, it was him, not me. I had no intention of golfing. It just bought me some time. Instead, I drove straight to my former church. Did you think I'd ever want to hear Bastard Bob preach again? It was still early, so I knew no one would be around, and I was right. I entered the building. Yes, we had a key because my wife worked there, and headed straight to the offices. My objective was to install remote micro cameras and mini microphones in her office and in Bastard Bob's office. It didn't take long to accomplish, and I concealed the transmitter behind old hymnals in the supply closet across the hall. The receiver was wired into my car's electrical system, enabling me to monitor their conversations and activities whenever they were in their offices. While I didn't expect much activity at the church, I was confident that observing them and listening to their conversations for a few days would yield valuable information. After ensuring everything was functioning correctly, I searched through her desk but found nothing noteworthy. However, I noticed a significant asterisk on her calendar for Monday, aligning with what I had overheard on Friday. I prepared accordingly. Next, I investigated Bastard Bob's office, but had little success finding incriminating evidence until a last-minute revelation struck me. Inspired by my surroundings, after all, I was in a church, I searched through filing cabinets for receipts of church expenditures. Sure enough, I discovered a file containing receipts for the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. Some were from late 2005, and others from the spring of 2006. Aware that I was pushing my luck by lingering, I quickly made copies of the receipts and restored everything to its original state before leaving. I drove to the golf course, parked in my usual spot, and entered the clubhouse to ensure my presence was noted. I settled at a table, nursing a Sprite for a couple of hours, scrutinizing the bills. I realized that the two from late 2005 were both on Mondays, coinciding with dates when I attended a conference at CBS headquarters in New York. What infuriated me the most was Bastard Bob's audacity to charge those rooms to the church under the label of conference room rental for meetings. He was having an affair with my wife in a motel, and I had unknowingly footed the bill. Though we had contributed to the church financially, I vowed not to contribute any longer. Their situation was dire now. With just a bit more evidence, their fate would be sealed. I was certain this had been ongoing for nearly a year, if not longer, aligning with suspicions I had entertained earlier. My hunch was that Bastard Bob had been involved with her even before she started working for him. Initially, she held a good position at the Telfor Corporation as a receptionist. However, she eagerly embraced the opportunity to work for the church, citing its proximity to home and her desire to serve. She claimed the pay was comparable to her previous job, but it was evident she was more enticed by the extra perks. My anger was escalating by the minute. I couldn't fathom how naive I had been. It infuriated me, but it also sickened me to realize that the woman I had cherished throughout our marriage could betray me without a second thought. I was determined to make them pay. Feeling it was time to delve deeper into my investigation, I retrieved my iPod from the car and tuned it to pick up the frequency of the receiver I had placed in the trunk. As I scrolled through the data, I watched as Bastard Bob made his way into his office and dialed a number. I regretted not bugging his phone directly, realizing I would only hear one side of the conversation, but decided it was better than nothing. I listened in as Bob spoke. "Yes, Sharon, I'm at the church. I came right after you called. What's troubling you so much?" There was a pause, presumably for Sharon's reply, which I couldn't hear. Bob continued, querying, "Oh really? Has he done that before?" Another pause followed, allowing Sharon to respond. Bob pressed on, "I see. What do you think triggered his reaction?" Yet another pause indicated Sharon's explanation. Bob seemed concerned. "You don't suppose he's suspicious of us, do you, Sharon?" After a pause, Bob chuckled. "All right, well, you can get back at him on Monday night." He then hung up the phone and sat in deep thought. Just before I turned off the receiver, I caught him muttering something under his breath. I made sure to record that muttering, thinking it might be useful later. With the transmission ended, I headed home, anticipating a frosty reception. Upon arrival, I busied myself with chores, mowing the lawn and cleaning the basement, in an attempt to ease the tension. My wife, Sharon, was silent when I entered, but the air was thick with unspoken words. At dinner, Sharon couldn't hold back any longer. "Dick, what's going on with you lately? Why have you been acting this way?" I retorted, "Sharon, considering you locked me out of our bedroom last night, I think you should be pondering your actions. It's rare for me to go out with the guys, and the one time I do, you explode. This situation is on you." Her frustration boiled over. "Damn you," she snapped. I met her anger calmly. "Is that how a devout Christian woman should speak? Your actions hardly reflect your professed beliefs." Oh my goodness, her expression was unmistakable. Guilt was plastered all over her face so thickly that anyone seeing her would have known she was unfaithful. How she could have believed I wouldn't notice, I don't understand. I'll admit, though, she did manage to recover smoothly and eventually excused herself from the table. But I couldn't help thinking, when I reveal the truth, her recovery won't be so graceful. Later, she entered the family room where I was watching television. Confidentially, it was Fox News, attempting to find balanced news coverage. Her eyes seemed a bit swollen, suggesting she might have shed some tears. The remainder of the evening proceeded without any major incident, and when I was ready for bed, I simply walked down the hall to the spare bedroom and turned in. A few minutes later, she entered the room and stood there. "What's the matter?" I inquired. "Aren't you going to join me in bed?" she asked. "Nope. You made it clear that intimacy wasn't on the agenda. so I might as well sleep alone and get a good night's rest, I replied. With that, she hurriedly left the room in tears. Frankly, I felt indifferent. Sunday morning, she woke me at 8 a.m., dressed for church, and asked if I intended to join her. I responded, "No, I'm staying home today. You go ahead and be the model church lady, and I'll enjoy a relaxing day here." Once again, I noticed that familiar expression on her face. I sensed she was starting to grasp the situation, but she managed to compose herself once more. However, this time, as she turned and left the room, I thought I detected a hint of sadness in her eyes. A while later, I heard her car drive off. Later, she attempted to initiate a conversation, but I brushed her off, insisting she leave me alone. That concluded the day, and we both retreated to our separate spaces. Monday morning, I left the house without encountering or speaking to her. As I was leaving, my phone rang, and tearfully, she apologized, expressing her love and lamenting the situation. "We'll discuss everything when I return home tonight," I replied before ending the call. I informed my boss that I would still be off for the day, but would handle the Monday night football game as planned. He was pleased with my availability and inquired about my well-being, to which I responded with a generic, "as good as can be expected." My next destination was the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. At the lobby, I approached a young man named Kevin, who was stationed behind the check-in desk. I explained my situation candidly, stating that I suspected my wife of infidelity and that she would likely be at the motel that night with another man. Despite his initial skepticism, I offered him a deal. If he allowed me to place a microphone in the room to record their conversation, I would provide him with a couple of tickets to the next Falcons game. He negotiated for 4 tickets, which I agreed to, knowing I had access to them through the station. Eventually, he handed me the key to the only whirlpool suite available. He was unaware that I planned not only to install a couple of mini microphones, but also to position a pair of micro cameras, much like the ones I had set up in the church offices. Additionally, I inserted a bug into the phone line to capture both sides of their conversations. After setting everything up, I conducted a test to ensure the transmission was clear, and the views from both the whirlpool and the bed were satisfactory. Confident in the setup, I confirmed that the devices were discreetly hidden and exited the room. On my way out, I returned the key to Kevin at the front desk and handed him the tickets for next week's game as promised. "Thanks, Kevin. I hope this all goes smoothly. Enjoy the game." With ample time to spare, I attended to several tasks I needed to address. I visited our bank and obtained cashier's checks for half of the funds from both our checking and savings accounts. I then proceeded to cancel our joint credit cards. Following that, I contacted my broker and arranged a meeting shortly after lunch to make adjustments to our investment accounts. He assured me everything would be prepared by the time I arrived. Next, I reached out to my attorney to discuss divorce proceedings and other related matters. We scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon when he would be available to meet with me. Finally, I drove to Planters National Bank in Marietta, Georgia, where I opened new accounts solely in my name and deposited the cashier's checks. I went for lunch in Marietta, although I had little appetite. Afterward, I drove to my broker's office to review the documents he had prepared. Essentially, they divided our investment portfolio equally, avoiding the need to sell assets and incur unnecessary tax liabilities. All that remained was for both Sharon and me to sign the papers. Taking the documents with me, I proceeded to meet my attorney. We discussed the divorce papers he had drafted. I agreed to pursue a no-fault divorce, proposing an equal split of assets if Sharon signed them promptly. However, in case she hesitated, I instructed him to include a provision for filing on grounds of adultery. I felt confident she would sign without delay. With everything arranged, all I needed was a quick dinner before heading to the station for the Monday night football broadcast. After leaving the attorney's office, I switched my cell phone back on and found a couple of messages from Sharon. In her messages, she expressed concern about my behavior and urged me to return home to discuss it before the game. Reading her messages, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. Despite knowing her plans for the evening, she still reached out with words of love and worry. It dawned on me that I had been incredibly naive to love and trust her so completely. I had made a decision. The only chance of salvaging our marriage was if she didn't show up at the motel tonight. If she chose not to go, It would indicate that she cared enough to try to fix things, recognizing the trouble our marriage was in. At 8 p.m., I engaged the automated system for the evening's broadcast, which meant Monday Night Football was on the air. Concurrently, I prepared to monitor my setup in the motel room remotely. At exactly 8:15, Bob entered the room and made a phone call. "Hey, I've arrived. Can you come over as soon as possible?" He spoke into the phone. "I'll be there shortly," came the reply. After the call ended, he murmured something else, which I noted to review later for details. This could be the end of my marriage, I mused, though I doubted any change in our situation. The pain was real, fueling my resolve for some form of retribution. I went through my list of contacts, reaching out to each one. It took some time, but eventually, I contacted everyone necessary. By that time, Sharon had made it to the motel, so I turned my attention back to the surveillance. Their conversation was deeply personal and intimate, highlighting the complexity and secrecy of their relationship. The depth of their involvement was clear, and the situation was far from what anyone would have expected, especially given their public personas. Listening to them, I felt a mix of emotions. The discovery was shocking, especially considering their roles in the community. It was a moment of realization about the extent of their actions and the implications for all involved. I felt sick. My wife, a pastor, and a church secretary sinking into such depravity. In the moments that followed, I realized just how twisted they were. What they were about to receive tonight, they deserved. They deserved it all. She was on the bed in a compromising position, her posture suggesting readiness for an intimate encounter. The camera caught every detail, including the anticipation visible on her face, just before their interaction became more physical. Her exclamations were filled with mixed emotions, passion, and surprise as she engaged in the moment. "Oh, this is intense," she might have said, her voice reflecting the depth of their engagement. "This is what I needed," she added, affirming her consent and participation. He responded with boldness, perhaps too caught up in the moment. "This will be unforgettable," he claimed, omitting any crass references to me. Her responses to his actions were vocal, a series of sounds that conveyed her intense experience. "Continue. This is what I want," she urged, signaling her nearing peak of emotion. His final movements were decisive, marking a moment of closure for them, a moment that symbolized the end of one chapter for me and the beginning of another, filled with pain and the drive for retribution. After a moment, the scene shifted, showing a continuation of their engagement with renewed energy. Her reactions were vocal and repetitive, indicating the intensity of her experience. It was clear that what transpired was beyond my ability to comprehend fully or match. Her satisfaction was something I could never provide in the way he could. This realization was crushing, highlighting a disparity in our desires and capacities. The performance continued beyond what I could bear to witness. As they paused, presumably for a break, the reality of their connection, and my exclusion from it, sank in deeper. Choosing to act, I switched the broadcast to a mode that would reveal their actions to a wider audience, a decision driven by a mix of hurt and a desire for vindication. As the phone started to ring, signaling the beginning of the fallout, I steeled myself against the incoming storm, ready to face the consequences of exposing a hidden truth. I dialed Sharon's number, my heart pounding as the dial tone echoed through the silent room. On the other end, I could almost picture her, glancing at the caller ID with a dismissive smirk. "It's Dick," Sharon said, presumably to Bob, her voice laced with defiance. "This time I'm not answering. Let's see how he likes that. Keep going, honey, while he's on the line." Frustrated, I disconnected and tried again, my determination growing. This time, Sharon seemed to reconsider, her voice barely audible as she decided, "Guess I better take it," before she fumbled for her phone. "Hello, Dick," she answered, her tone cold and unwelcoming. "Sharon, where are you? What are you up to?" I pressed, seeking any hint of truth in her voice. "I decided to go shopping since you didn't call earlier. Now I'm just grabbing a bite before heading home," she lied smoothly, her words a sharp contrast to the reality I knew. "Shopping at this hour?" I pushed further, skepticism coloring my tone. "Yeah, and I plan to splurge," she shot back, defiance in her voice. "Fantastic, Sharon. Thanks for being such a wonderful wife," I replied, the sarcasm in my voice barely masking the pain. "Don't talk to me like that, you jerk. I don't know what's gotten into you. Goodbye," she snapped, ending the call with a finality that stung. As I pondered their continuing betrayal, a plan formed in my mind. I decided to interrupt their tryst, not with another direct call to Sharon, knowing she wouldn't answer, but by calling the motel directly. "Kevin, it's Dick. Watching Monday Night Football? No? Well, you might want to start. Could you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" I asked, masking my turmoil with casual conversation. After a brief pause, Bob's voice came through. "Hey, what do you want, Dick?" It was my turn to confront them. "Bastard Bob, let me speak to Sharon, will you?" I demanded, a calm facade over my boiling anger. Sharon's confused voice then joined. "Dick, why are you calling here?" "Sharon, I know everything. The cheating, the lies. I'm filing for divorce and you're getting out. And Bob, you're not getting off easy either," I declared, my voice steady with resolve. "What's wrong with you, Dick? I can't understand you lately," she retorted, her confusion feigned. "It's over, Sharon. Maybe you should tune into Monday Night Football for a change. Enjoy the show." "Goodbye," I said, hanging up, my decision final and my heart heavy with the weight of ending. On the live monitor, I watched her switch on the TV and witnessed the shocking video of her and Bastard Bob. With a delayed reaction, she saw what the entire Atlanta area had witnessed. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she repeated as she hastily dressed and fled the room. Bastard Bob was eager to leave, cursing all the while. "I will destroy that son of a witch," he muttered. Bastard Bob should watch what he mumbles. It could come back to haunt him. Once they left, I powered down the monitors and let the video play to the end. Then, I switched off the live assist mode and returned the system to fully automated broadcast mode. Grabbing the tape, I left the broadcast booth, likely for the last time, taking a few personal items from my desk. Now you're caught up. I spent the rest of the night at Frankie's, and yes, my halftime show was the hot topic. After the game, I hailed a cab home. Sharon was sitting in the darkened living room when I arrived, the phone off the hook, tears evident. She wept profusely, but I was indifferent. It was over for me. "How could you do this to me, Dick?" she sobbed. "After all these years together, how?" "No, Sharon," I countered. "The real question is, how could you do this to me?" "I'm drunk. I'm going to bed. We'll talk tomorrow," she said. She remained on the sofa the next morning, looking exhausted. It seemed she hadn't slept, but again, I didn't care. She brought this upon herself. I replaced the phone on the hook, and it immediately began to ring. For the next hour and a half, I fielded calls from family, friends, church members, my former boss, and both of my daughters. They were deeply disturbed by what they witnessed, and nothing I said could soothe them. I understood it was harsh for them to witness, but they're adults and will eventually overcome it. Mrs. Bastard Bob called too, inquiring if I had a tape of the incident. I assured her I kept a copy in safekeeping and would provide it if needed. Clearly, everyone I contacted had seen the Monday Night Football halftime show. Some were upset due to its explicit content, while others, like her parents, criticized me for exposing her. However, most were supportive and empathetic, recognizing the difficulty of the situation. It was a challenging experience, but a consequence I had to face for my actions. Sharon remained tearful throughout. Eventually, I left the phone off the hook and made myself coffee. Returning, I offered her some and presented the divorce papers and investment documents for her to sign. "I'm filing for divorce, Sharon," I said firmly. "After what I discovered and saw last night, it's clear to me that you've been unfaithful for quite some time. I can't stay in this marriage knowing that. The documents I've prepared are for a no-fault divorce, and I'm proposing we split everything equally. I need you to sign the divorce papers and the agreement on how we'll divide our investments today. There's no room for negotiation on this. The terms I've offered are more than fair. You have until 5 p.m. today to get legal advice and agree to my terms. If you don't, after 5:01 p.m., I'll proceed with filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and aim for a division of property that reflects our individual contributions and earnings, which would largely benefit me. This is your best option. I want to make it clear that contesting this by alleging adultery would be unwise. It will become public knowledge in Atlanta, and you'll be seen for what you've done with Bob. You need to consider this carefully. Sharon, take this offer. It's the best way forward for both of us." "Dick, I still love you. I want to fix our marriage. "Can't we try to work things out?" Sharon pleaded. "The problem isn't about love. It's about your choices and actions. You've put someone else before our marriage, and I can't overlook that. You need to sort this out and talk to your lawyer as soon as possible." After some time, Sharon came back with the documents signed. "My lawyer reviewed everything and agrees that your offer is fair under the circumstances," she informed me, her voice carrying a mix of resignation and hope. "Dick, is there any chance we could talk? I'd like to explain my side and see if there's any possibility for us to reconcile," she added, looking for a glimmer of hope. I decided to hear her out, curious about her reasoning and whether this was an isolated incident or indicative of deeper issues in our relationship. We sat at the kitchen table, and she recounted everything to me. There were no others involved. It began shortly before she started working for Bastard Bob. She admitted she didn't know why, as she was content with me, but something about Bastard Bob attracted her, perhaps his charisma. She believed he loved her. I acknowledged his charisma, but shattered her illusion when I played back 2 sound bites I'd saved of him. The first was from that initial day. "That idiotic woman better keep her affair with me hidden from her husband. Despite her sweet and willing nature, she'll be gone soon. It was easy to seduce her, but she needs to go." The second was from just before her arrival. "I'll ravage her tonight and fire her tomorrow. If she protests, I'll threaten to expose her to Dick. I can't risk him finding out." So Sharon, you not only wrecked our marriage but misjudged Bastard Bob's feelings. To him, you were just a toy, a demeaned witch. I saw how he treated you and how you enjoyed it. I never satisfied you like that because I saw you as a loving wife, not a witch. There's no way I can stay married to you. You violated our vows, and I can't ignore that. Plus, you'd never be content with me again. No matter our love, we can't overcome the damage you caused. She remained seated, tears flowing, acknowledging the truth in my words. Eventually, she signed both sets of papers. I informed her I'd be relocating, offering her time to find new accommodations. Financially, I doubted she could maintain the house, and I had no desire to reside there amidst countless memories. Thus, our agreement stipulated the house's sale, with proceeds split equally like our other assets. After collecting my papers and pre-packed bags, I departed, dropping off documents at my broker's before settling in a hotel for the night. The following day, I met with my attorney, who promptly filed the divorce papers with the county's Superior Court. We also addressed my legal woes at the station and with the FCC. He outlined potential consequences, including hefty fines and career repercussions. While jail seemed unlikely, significant financial penalties loomed, signaling an end to my broadcasting career. Within days, repercussions materialized. FCC served me, initiating a legal battle that would drain my savings, amounting to nearly a year's salary. Even worse, my broadcast license got revoked, barring me from my profession for 2 years. The silver lining, however, came from TT, who, despite the illegal and spiteful nature of my actions, offered me a job with responsibilities that complied with FCC restrictions. It turned out TT had sympathy for me, likely influenced by his own bitter divorce experience with Henry's daughter and Peter's sister. I found some appreciation for TT in that regard. Bastard Bob confronted me once at Frankie's, seemingly ready for a physical altercation. However, I ended up pinning him down, asserting my dominance. "Now, Bastard Bob, I don't want to hear from you again. Is that clear?" I asserted. His response? "Forget you." Perhaps he needed another reminder, so I nudged him in the ribs. "Bastard Bob, I have an audio recording of you threatening me. If I take it to the police, I could get a restraining order against you and press assault charges. With that evidence, you might end up in prison. Is that what you want?" I questioned. He shook his head in refusal. As I delivered one final kick for good measure, I remarked, "Well, I suppose this marks the end of our conversation. Although he's no longer a pastor, he's still the same despicable person. He got ousted from the church, and his ordination was revoked by the denomination. Last I heard, he found employment at a city travel agency. Despite his charisma, he'll need to make ends meet, especially since his wife successfully sued him for divorce on grounds of adultery, resulting in a substantial settlement against him. My incriminating tape likely played a significant role in her victory, despite its questionable legality. I'm moving forward with my life. While it's not perfect, I'm discovering ways to find happiness. I've casually dated a few women in recent months, but haven't committed to any serious relationships. I've abstained from sexual activity because I believe in reserving it for marriage, steadfast in my values even if others disagree. When I encounter the right partner, I'll marry her, and together we'll experience the joys of intimacy as intended. I'm patient, confident that the right person will come along in due time, and I'm willing to wait until then. I occasionally encounter Sharon at events like Stephanie's college graduation and Melanie's baby's baptism. While I maintain civility, I've made it clear that my presence isn't for her benefit. I'm not interested in friendship or any form of connection. It's evident that she's not content. I can sense her emotional turmoil stemming from our breakup, and she likely regrets her actions. However, her regret doesn't change the fact that she betrayed our marriage by becoming involved with another man. While some might forgive such transgressions, my moral code is firm, leaving little room for leniency. She'll have to live with the knowledge that she sacrificed a life with me for her affair with Bastard Bob. Despite my profound love for her, she discarded it all. Moreover, her involvement in the infamous Monday Night Football incident has tarnished her reputation irreparably. Everyone who witnessed it now views her as promiscuous. I've heard she receives numerous date offers, but to her credit, she hasn't accepted any. It must be agonizing to know that most of these men view her as nothing more than a conquest. It's not a dignified way to navigate life, but it's a consequence of her actions. She brought it upon herself. At around 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, Beverly entered through the front door, tossed her purse and keys onto the nightstand, and made her way down the hallway to the master bedroom. I'm unsure if she noticed me sitting in the office, but it didn't really matter. Over the past few years, I've practically become invisible to her. Approaching her, I retrieved her set of keys, took my spare keys from her, and then rummaged through her purse. I removed her cell phone and wallet, extracting all the cash and credit cards from my wallet and stashing the loot in my pocket, just to be safe. I also grabbed her driver's license before returning to my spot in the office. 15 minutes later, Bev emerged from the hall, looking well-dressed, and spotted me. As she slung her purse over her shoulder and grabbed her keys, she remarked, "I'm meeting some girls from work. Don't wait up." "No, you're not going out with girls from work," I protested. "Jack, you should know by now. You don't control me. I'll do as I please," she retorted. "I didn't say you couldn't hang out with girls from work. I said you're not going to. You're going to see your boyfriend, so don't lie to me," I stated. Beverly stood silently for a moment before boldly entering the office and confronting me. "All right, Jack, you know I'd prefer to handle this differently, but let's end it here. You have two options. Either salvage what's left of this marriage by granting me some freedom, or face divorce and be cut out of my life." "What's it going to be?" she challenged. "I'll take door number 3, I replied with a smirk. "Don't be childish. There's no door number 3. Either accept that I have a lover now, a real man, or brace yourself for the consequences," Beverly warned. I stood up, walked over to Bev, and pushed her against the wall, removing the engagement ring and wedding rings from her left hand. With my face close to hers and a fierce glare in my eyes, I whispered angrily, "Here's your door number 3. It's my front door. When you leave through it, it'll be the last time you walk out with anything and never return. You won't get another penny of my money. You'll lose your husband, your daughter, your house, your money, your car, and your job eventually." "You're living in a fantasy, Jack," she muttered nervously. "My lawyer will destroy you tomorrow. I'll send the divorce papers to your workplace. If you damage me, you'll suffer more than I will." I pulled her away from the wall and dragged her toward the front door, her heels causing her to stumble as she screamed incoherently. Bev struggled to maintain her balance, her composure shattered. Throughout our marriage, I had never laid a hand on her, and she didn't know how to react. As she began to regain her senses in the front yard, I shut the door and locked it, the lock already replaced earlier in the day. Earlier, as Bev left, I made the first of 2 calls. I dialed my 19-year-old daughter's number at college. "Hey, it's Dad. Our situation with your mom has hit a crucial point. Looks like she'll be moving in with her boyfriend, and I need to talk to you about it. Just so you know, I've got our last conversation and tons of past arguments recorded. You can listen to them, so you know the truth when she tries to twist things and blame me, which she probably will. Truth is, your mom's been cheating. Not sure how many times, but she's chosen to leave us for this guy. I'll explain more soon, but her boyfriend seems pretty sketchy, so be cautious in your relationship with her. I approached Patty, asking her to return home for the weekend. My intention was to have a conversation and offer her the chance to listen to some tapes if she desired. Thankfully, Patty agreed to come home on Friday. After sorting that out, I reached out to Martha, our neighbor down the block. "Martha, it's Jack," I said over the phone. "If the offer's still good, I'd like to take you up on it. Could you come over in about an hour?" I kept my explanation brief. I felt it was necessary to confide in Martha. Bev and I had met young, married, and soon had Patty. Things seemed good at the start, but Bev's demeanor changed rapidly. She became grumpy, manipulative, and controlling. I tried my best to keep the peace and make her happy, but it only seemed to make things worse. Looking back, I realized I contributed to my own suffering by constantly trying to please her. Now in our 40s, our lives were a mess. It wasn't long before I discovered Bev's affair with a man named Sylvester, known as Sly, who had a violent past. The realization that our marriage was beyond repair brought me a sense of relief, and I began planning my next steps. "I've heard stories where the husband takes half the money," I continued, "but not me. I took every penny I could find, including all the cash in the house. I changed the locks and planned to provoke Bev as much as possible. I knew her well enough to anticipate her reactions. She's dangerous in many ways, but this time she'd be a danger to herself, too." In fact, my planning had started long before I discovered Bev's affair. For years, I had been discreetly recording our arguments. Bev thought the device I always carried with me was a simple MP3 player, but in reality, I was building a library of her outbursts to document her behavior. I knew no one would believe my stories unless I had proof, as she only mistreated me behind closed doors. I wanted to be able to share my experiences with everyone, including Patty, to reveal Bev's true nature. On the Monday following our Sunday argument, I hosted a gathering in the company break room. A prominent banner declared "Happy Divorce" overhead. With cake and ice cream at the ready, I eagerly anticipated the arrival of the process server. Fortunately, it was a pleasantly plump girl handling the task. Numerous photos were snapped as my co-workers and I celebrated the receipt of our divorce papers. I even took a picture while accepting the papers, planting a kiss on the server girl's cheek as she sported a festive hat. In another snapshot, I playfully fed her cake, both of us grinning. After the festivities, I emailed the photos to Bev, along with others from the party. Among them were shots of myself and Martha, my roommate, lounging in bed with sheets drawn up, smiling broadly. I hoped Bev would notice her wedding rings adorning Martha's left hand resting on my chest. An hour later, I received an angry call. "You scoundrel! My lawyer will tear you apart after seeing these photos. What a foolish move." "Hardly, Bev. There's nothing inappropriate in these images. No nudity, just pranks between neighbors. Just light-hearted pictures," I countered. "We'll address this later, Jack. I'll swing by the house this evening to retrieve some belongings. It might be best if you're not there." "If I'm absent, you won't gain entry. All locks have been changed. If you need anything, be there well before 6:45. Martha and I have plans at 7 o'clock, and I'd rather not be late." Last night marked the most satisfying closeness I've experienced, and tonight promises to be even better. With that, I ended the call and ignored her subsequent 5 attempts. While I haven't answered all her calls since, I have listened to every message. Unlike other men in similar situations, there was a good chance Bev might slip up or accidentally reveal a secret in her angry messages. And indeed, she did divulge herself several times in the following weeks. At 4:30 that day, I drove to Bev's workplace parking lot, aiming to arrive before the evening rush. Confirming the absence of security cameras, what I had to do would be swift. Pulling up beside Bev's car, I circled around her, using wire cutters to sever the valve stems on all her tires. Oh, she'd certainly be enraged. And there'd be no fixing them in time to make it home by 6:45. However, it was around 6:35 when she appeared. Evidently, she'd been out with someone, desperate to return home. Having seen receipts for clothing she hadn't brought home, I knew she must have had plenty stashed at her lover's. She must have wanted something else. Slipping out the back door, I hurried to Martha's house, leaving Bev pounding on the front door and shouting. Upon my return that evening, I found my front window shattered, blood splattered around it. After reviewing the porch security footage, I called the police. The video depicted Bev smashing the window with a tire iron, her threats to harm me echoing clear. Unfortunately for her, the lock I'd installed required a key from both sides. As she recoiled, she sliced her forearm deeply, inciting more screams and threats. I promptly reported the incident, and an officer guided me through filing a restraining order. The next morning, Bev was served with papers forbidding her from coming within 500 feet of me or our home. To say she was livid would be an understatement. "What in the world are you doing, idiot?" kicked off her next call, filled with fury and renewed threats. I meticulously recorded the entire conversation. A few hours later, after she had calmed down a bit, she called again. This time, she mentioned sending her friend Lindsay to retrieve some of her belongings that evening. What could she be so desperate to retrieve from the house, I wondered. Suspicions brewing, I agreed to meet Lindsay at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. To prepare, I left work a bit early to set up a video camera in my bedroom, with a monitor discreetly installed in my office. Lindsay arrived promptly, and I greeted her warmly. While she packed some clothes into 2 black plastic trash bags, I sat on the bed, observing. Lindsay looked at me nervously, and then requested water from the kitchen. I smiled and left. Upon glancing at the monitor, I noticed Lindsay pulling a shoebox from her closet and placing it into a bag nearby. She then resumed selecting clothes. Upon her return with water, I observed her continuing to pack. She declared that it should suffice, and requested me to take one bag while she took the other, noting that the one she held seemed heavier. I offered to assist Lindsay, but she declined, insisting she was fine and asking me to grab another bag. As she began to fidget and move towards the door with her package, I questioned if there was anything in the package I should be aware of. I grasped her wrist and opened the package, to which she responded anxiously, explaining that it contained clothes and items that Bev needed. Realizing her lie, I confronted Lindsay about the odor emanating from the box, and upon opening it, I found stacks of worn $50 and $100 bills. Accusing her of attempting to steal from me, I rose to my feet and escorted her towards the exit and down the hallway. Lindsay claimed that the money belonged to Bev and that she was merely sent to collect it, denying any intention of theft. However, I pointed out that she came to my house supposedly for clothes, but was leaving with a box of money, which, in my view, constituted theft. Threatening to call the police, I insisted that she prepare to be arrested for robbery. In response, Lindsay pleaded with me not to involve the authorities, citing her children and husband. I seated her on the couch and expressed my disappointment, stating that she would never be welcome in my house again. Despite her protests and tears, I made it clear that if she wished to make amends for her wrongdoing, she had only one chance. "You'll leave this house and inform Bev that I caught you stealing. Then you'll report everything you hear or see to me, especially regarding our divorce or her relationship with Sly. You won't divulge anything about our arrangement. Bev made a terrible mistake getting involved with this loser, and you'll ultimately help her leave him." I informed Lindsay that if she cooperated with me, I had the entire incident on video, and I could call the police and file a report against her at any time. Reluctantly, Lindsay agreed to act as my informant. As soon as she departed, I took the box of money and walked to Martha's house at the end of the block. She agreed to conceal it for me until I could safely stash it somewhere beyond Bev's reach. I knew the likely source of the money. Bev's Aunt Mabel, known for her stinginess, passed away a few months ago, leaving Bev as her sole heir. While I knew Aunt Mabel had left Bev a small rural cottage, there was never any mention of money. It seemed that when Bev inspected the cabin after the will reading, she stumbled upon her aunt's hidden cash. When my wife Bev called, enraged and screaming, I recorded the conversation cautiously. "This money is mine, Jack. I want my damn money," she yelled. "Bev, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I caught Lindsay trying to pilfer money from my nightstand. This is mine." "You know exactly what I'm referring to. The money in the shoebox is mine. It's from Aunt Mabel," I retorted. "Maybe Lindsay found some money in a shoebox, but if so, she likely took it and kept it for herself. I don't have it. And if you had money here unknown to me, you didn't report it on your taxes last year. I've reviewed our tax returns. You're welcome to involve the police, and then we'll inform the IRS about this money, letting them handle your tax evasion," she snapped before hanging up. I felt a need for retaliation. I'd pushed Bev's buttons too hard for her to simply disappear. Restricted by a restraining order from leaving her house, I anticipated she might retaliate against me through my car, considering I'd previously vandalized hers. Hence, I had a dashboard-mounted camera installed, but it wasn't sufficient. If she chose that route, I wanted clear footage. Thus, when I parked in front of the garage on Wednesday morning, I set up an exterior camera. Discreetly positioned, it streamed video to my desk, accessible an hour before lunch. I watched on my laptop as Bev parked behind my car, got out, and began smashing it with a hammer, shattering windows and denting panels. The sight of her breaking the windshield and yelling sent a shiver down my spine. I dialed emergency, and a police car awaited her as she left the driveway. Presenting the video evidence of my damaged Toyota, the authorities arrested Bev, recognizing her actions as a criminal offense. The resisting arrest charge was an added bonus. As she was led away, her pleading eyes met my silent stare. Bev's divorce lawyer phoned me Wednesday, notifying me of a court hearing regarding access to the money withdrawn from our joint accounts. Set for Thursday at 10 a.m., I arrived at 9:50, wondering if Bev had posted bail. She entered with her lawyer, wearing a smug expression. Addressing the judge, her lawyer asserted, "Your Honor, my client was denied access to the shared bank accounts. After she filed for divorce, her husband illicitly emptied them. We're requesting a 50-50 split. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to address the court?" "Yes, Your Honor. My wife, who has been unfaithful, has been withdrawing her own funds from our joint accounts for months. The money I withdrew was fair compensation since I cover rent and bills. She abandoned our marriage to be with her affair partner." Bev rose, objecting. "That's untrue. He drained our savings and checking accounts, leaving me with nothing." Her lawyer intervened, guiding her back to her seat for a brief conference while I presented documents to the judge. "Your Honor, these bank statements cover last year. You'll see highlighted amounts, including Bev's salary, up until a few months ago, along with periodic bonuses. Then, about 6 months ago, her deposits ceased, including bonuses. I have a recorded conversation with her HR confirming her direct deposit switch to her personal account. The total amount diverted from our joint account is significant. It's evident my unfaithful wife possesses substantial wealth obtained from our marriage." The judge scrutinized the bank statements and then addressed Beverly. "Do you have any response, Miss Reynolds?" Her lawyer rose cautiously, stating, "Your Honor, even if my client has personal funds, Mr. Reynolds is still obligated to provide her with her fair share." "Well, Counselor, I don't appreciate deceit. Miss Reynolds claimed she was destitute, yet she entered with you. It's clear she was financially supported from marital assets, deceiving her husband and the court. Since Mr. Reynolds covers expenses from his own funds, there's no reason to alter the financial arrangements. Property division will be addressed in the final divorce decree. Case closed." As I left, Bev confronted me in the hallway. I began noting her threats. "Bev, you're violating the restraining order. I'll contact the police if you don't leave. By the way, how was jail? Ready for more time there? You're facing criminal charges." Though she seemed ready to retaliate, I continued toward the exit. She stood, fists clenched, face flushed. Later that evening, I went to a different bar where I had previously encountered an intriguing man named Zeke. Fortunately, he was there. I greeted him and asked if he remembered me, to which he replied that my name wasn't important. Zeke then mentioned that he still had the beat-up car. Expressing his disdain for the car, he explained that his wife had taken the good one when she left with her new lover. He complained about the broken air conditioning and his inability to afford a replacement. I inquired about his car insurance and suggested that if he followed my advice, I might be able to help him get something better. Zeke responded by saying he was listening. "Let's imagine you're driving down 38th Street, and suddenly a gray cat dashes out in front of you. Naturally, you hit the brakes, and there's a chance the lady behind you might rear-end your lousy car at speeds over 15 miles per hour. Your car could end up totaled, but as long as you're firmly against the headrest with your seatbelt on, you should be okay. Insurance will take care of the damages. Plus, you could at least afford a car with air conditioning." "But what if the lady who hits me gets injured? I can't do that to her." "Well, I can assure you she'll be an unfaithful wife, and there won't be anyone else in her car if you follow my instructions. What do you think about that?" Oh man, that would be great. I can't stand cheaters. And I definitely need to get rid of this car. Park at the corner of 38th and Lessing by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Keep an eye out for a blue Miata leaving the parking lot and heading your way. Pull out in front of it. She doesn't like passing other cars, so drive a block or so until she's tailing you. Then, you'll spot a cat darting across the road. Get ready and hit the brakes hard. Just stay in the car. Afterward, dial emergency and mention a possible neck injury. And by the way, we've never met. I won't be back in this bar, and we don't know each other. Dude, I'm colder than the AC in your new car. On Friday, I left work early to meet my daughter at home. As planned, she finished her classes and returned on Sunday evening. We discussed the divorce situation, and I played her a recording of my conversation with her mother about door number 3. Patty was stunned by her mother's ruthless tone and demands. Then, I shared recordings from the past 2 years, revealing a side of Bev she'd never known. What do you know about the guy Mom's with? Dad? I know he's trouble, and I want you to steer clear of him. If you must meet your mom, make sure it's in a public place. I don't know what he's capable of to get to me. In any case, always have something to protect yourself if there's even a hint he might be around. Patty, I knew your mom and I had our issues, but I never realized the extent of it. What went wrong between us? This was a question I had anticipated, so I proceeded to offer a condensed version of my viewpoint to Patty. I explained to her that her mother and I had fundamentally different perspectives on marriage. After reflecting on the matter, I conveyed to Patty that I had identified 4 main ways power could be distributed in a relationship. There are instances when neither party takes the lead, resulting in a situation where everything drifts aimlessly like a ship without a rudder. Alternatively, both partners may assume responsibility, leading to constant battles over dominance, or a division of control over different aspects of the relationship. Some couples might even share responsibility equally, which was my expectation going into our relationship. However, things didn't pan out as expected. Another scenario arises when the man assumes full control. While such an arrangement may function under specific circumstances, modern perceptions often view such paternalistic relationships as oppressive to women. Yet, if a man wholeheartedly devotes himself to his wife, it can resemble a fairy tale romance, offering a fulfilling life to a wife with the right temperament, free from the burden of difficult decisions. Alternatively, it could mirror your maternal grandparents' dynamic, where your grandmother was passive and your grandfather was dominant and at times harsh. Your mother likely grew up witnessing this and expected a similar power dynamic in our relationship. Consequently, when I attempted to share equal footing with her, she perceived it as a sign of weakness on my part, leading to increasing disrespect despite my efforts to please her. This leads me to the final scenario, a relationship where the wife dominates. It seems your mom opted to take charge. When I failed to meet her standards of a good person, she turned cruel. She dictated which projects should be completed and insisted they meet her standards. Countless times, she initiated family projects only to micromanage every detail, leaving many unfinished because I couldn't tolerate feeling emasculated in my own home. She even instructed me on how to hold tools while working, making it unbearable. In such cases, when the wife dominates, it goes against human nature. I don't comprehend how this dynamic can function. While a husband may remain loving and affectionate, the wife loses respect for him as she exerts control. I believe this dynamic has manifested in our relationship. As I began to resist, Beverly perceived it as a lack of responsibility on my part. By then, she already viewed me as weak. When I refused to be bossed around, she saw me as a rebellious child. I doubt I'll ever regain her respect. This divorce may be my final opportunity to earn it back. I explained to Patty that she would understand my actions when she realized how difficult it was to assert my intolerance for her mother's lifestyle. I advised her that when making significant decisions in her future relationships, such as starting a family or choosing careers and homes, it was crucial for mutual respect to prevail. I emphasized the importance of both Patty and her partner, understanding what to expect to avoid the unhappy situation Beverly and I found ourselves in. In response, Patty assured me that she would keep my advice in mind and promised to consider it. Shortly after, the phone rang. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Memorial Hospital. Your wife was in a car accident. She's stable and not severely injured, but she'll be with us, at least for the night." Patty and I drove to the hospital, and I allowed her to enter the room first. She didn't stay long, and afterward, I requested to speak with Bev alone. When she emerged, wearing a gloomy expression, I suspected Patty had spoken harshly to her. "God, you look terrible, Bev," I remarked with a slight grin. "What a dreadful week, huh? First, you lose your marriage, husband, and home. Then you get served with a restraining order and arrested for a felony. Next, you lose some of your expected money, and now your car is totaled, and you're here in the hospital with a broken wrist and a bruised face from the airbag. Seems like this divorce is turning out much better for me." "Freak you," she retorted. "Oh, Bev, where's your old sly charm? Has he come to visit yet? Don't worry, he's probably busy with one of his other 2 women right now." Her complexion turned pale. "You probably didn't know about the others when you started all this, did you? Well, looks like you know now. I wonder how long it will be before he wants you to serve one of them. I never thought of you as a people pleaser, but that might be a good skill to learn considering how much you'll need it in prison." "I'm not going to jail. My lawyer will get these false charges dropped." "Really? You crash my car and threaten my health, and you think you'll get off easy? Because when I spoke to the DA, he made it clear he's gunning for you. He's got photographic evidence and an upcoming election to win. Now he's aiming to look like a hero cracking down on crime. I believe he'll push for the maximum penalty." She simply sat there, staring at me. "By the way, did you decide which car insurance company to contact?" I asked. "Car insurance? What are you talking about? We still have the same old." "Wait, so you didn't bother getting insurance this week when you filed for divorce? I removed your car from my insurance. You must have known about this, considering you insisted on having only your name on your Miata. If you didn't get insurance this week, you're in serious trouble. You'll face fines, towing costs, and 3 years of payments. That Miata may end up in a junkyard while you're still paying for it. And since you won't have a job after your felony conviction, you may not need another car. Plus, you'll likely have to cover the medical bills for the guy you hit, and his insurance company will demand payment for the damages. Damn it. But at least you have your own medical insurance, right?" "I'm on yours." No, I removed you from my health insurance on Monday. Didn't you take care of that too?" "Baby, you're in big trouble. The ambulance ride, ER visit, x-rays, doctor's fees, cast for your arm, hospital stay, and follow-up care will cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Hey, speaking of medicine, the other day I was reminiscing about when you fell ill a couple of years back. Remember? I took a week off to care for you. I held your head while you were vomiting and cleaned up everything afterward. When you couldn't make it to the bathroom in time, I called the doctor and went to the pharmacy to get you medicine. Then, a week later when you felt better, you started scolding me again, insulting me, and calling me names. I wonder how well old Sly will take care of you next time you're sick. Well, it's time for me to call Sly now that you think he's done with his other woman. I wish you a good life." As I left, Beverly sat there crying, but I didn't care anymore. Everything went on as usual for some time. I kept in touch with Lindsay occasionally. She started worrying about Sly's influence over Bev, and gradually, Lindsay distanced herself from her. Then one evening, as I returned home and headed to my front door, I was attacked on the lawn. I was cautious about possible attacks, but I didn't see this one coming. A guy wearing a ski mask knocked the wind out of me, twisted my arm behind my back, and demanded I give him the box of money and tell the DA to drop the charges. I felt helpless, but still had the car alarm remote in my hand. I pressed the panic button, setting off the alarm. Sly got furious, hit me again, and then ran off quickly as the neighbor's porch lights turned on and people started looking out. I yelled for someone to call emergency, and a police officer arrived a few minutes later. I wasn't injured enough for an ambulance, and Sly was long gone. None of my neighbors could identify him, so he escaped punishment for the attack. An even bigger shock came when I told my daughter about it the next day. "Dad, I didn't want to tell you, but I also had an encounter with Sly. Mom called me to talk. I agreed, but insisted we meet away from his apartment. She asked me to pick her up, but when I arrived, she sat me down on their couch. Then Sly came out and talked to me. He said since Mom wasn't coping well with her injuries in bed, I would have to tend to his needs. He claimed she owed him, and I would have to pay for it. I looked at my mother, and she just stared at the floor without saying anything. Sly told me to make her comply. Mom looked at me and pleaded, saying, "Please, baby, stay with him. It won't be that bad, and I really need you to do this for me." He then approached me, grabbed my wrist, and tried to force me to stand up, saying we were going to the bedroom. With my right hand on the pepper spray in my purse, I sprayed it in his face when he pulled me away. He screamed, grabbed his face, and I grabbed my purse, attempting to pull my mother out the door, but she resisted and went toward him. I yelled at her to come with me, but she chose to assist him in the bathroom, so I left. I can't believe my own mom tried to set me up with that idiot. I don't know if I can ever forgive her for this. I was boiling with anger, like any father in my situation. Contemplating my Beretta in the bedroom, I almost reached for it. After a while, my daughter reassured me, confirming she wasn't damaged, and advised me to consider the future. I made Patty promise not to walk alone until after the trial and always to have protection with her. She agreed to only date fellow students and never be alone in public. Gradually, I regained my composure. Sly urged me to talk to the DA, but he didn't anticipate the conversation I had. I presented a recording of my daughter discussing Sly and reminded him of Sly's attack on me. The DA inquired if I'd consider leniency toward Bev or dropping the charges. Absolutely not. I insisted on seeking the maximum penalty. Bev is under the control of this manipulative person, and separating them is the only way to help her. A stint in prison might straighten her out. The district attorney agreed, and the trial proceeded. I felt fairly confident at home and work, but there were moments of vulnerability, especially when entering or leaving the garage. However, I was cautious during my commute. Our house sits about 10 miles down the ranch road, with only one turnoff in the next 15 miles. I was well aware of other potential danger zones. During the long drive home, I always had my Beretta with me. One evening, a few days before Bev's trial, I noticed headlights of a pickup truck behind me about 2 miles from home, sending shivers down my spine. Soon, it was tailgating me aggressively, just 20 feet from my rear bumper, going 55 miles per hour. I called emergency on my phone and activated the voice recorder. As I accelerated to 70 miles per hour, the pickup kept pace. Frantically, I requested the emergency operator to contact the detective investigating my assault. The truck continued to tail me for another 5 miles as I narrated the situation. With the pistol lying next to me, I prepared for potential danger. As I approached a bridge spanning a small creek bed, I suspected the driver would attempt to force me off the road. Approaching the bridge, about 100 yards away, the pickup accelerated, indicating its intent to force me off the road. I briefly glimpsed Bev's face in the passenger seat as it pulled up beside me. I braked sharply, causing the car to skid, but maintaining control. Although the truck stopped ahead of me, my quick braking prevented a collision. My car slid to a halt by the roadside, its rear resting on a slope leading down to the creek bed. Exiting the car, I grabbed my weapon, phone, and recorder, descending the steep gravel slope beneath the bridge. As I descended, I noticed the pickup's brake lights illuminate. Navigating in the darkness, I cautiously felt my way under the bridge. Despite the risk of encountering a rattlesnake, I was more concerned about other dangers. Breathing heavily, I sought a secure hiding spot, eventually stopping and tilting the Beretta. I waited anxiously, but heard nothing for a while. Cell phone contact with emergency was lost. Attempting to redial in the dark proved futile due to poor signal reception. I was stuck, uncertain if help was on the way. At least the ominous growl of the pickup truck overhead was absent. I resolved to remain stationary, prepared to spend the night there if necessary. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes before I heard a siren in the distance, approaching from the same direction as me. Realizing they were far behind, I began walking up the hill, leaving the Beretta under the bridge. Raising my hands as I approached the road, I implored the arriving police not to shoot. Observing 2 cars parked across the road, blocking both lanes, I heard sirens from the other side and saw a pickup truck heading back to the bridge. I stumbled and fell into the mud. While my view was limited, I heard the pickup screech to a stop, and officers ordered the driver to exit and lie on the ground. Other police cars following the pickup stopped behind it. Soon, Bev and Sly were in custody on attempted slaughter charges. Though deeply worried, I returned home, showered, and attempted to sleep to no avail. When your spouse faces multiple felonies, divorce appears remarkably straightforward. The judge expressed sympathy, and Bev and her lawyer offered little resistance. Desperate to minimize her prison sentence, Bev proposed conceding virtually everything in the divorce for assistance in reducing her punishment. During the sentencing hearing, I testified to Bev's prior virtues before falling under Sly's influence. I expressed a willingness to forgive her over time for attempting to end my life. Omitting her likely infidelity and years of torment, I could not interpret her facial expression in court, nor did I speak to her directly. Ultimately, Sly received a lengthy prison sentence. I hope he shares a cell with a burly inmate named Bubba, who finds him particularly appealing. The judge showed more leniency towards Bev, but she won't be eligible for parole for at least 3 years. So it's been approximately 4 years since Bev was incarcerated. The DA's office informed me that she was granted parole about a year ago. I kept waiting to hear from her, knowing she's not in contact with Patty. Revenge seemed promising, but it didn't live up to expectations. I found myself unable to stop dwelling on everything that had unfolded. So, unexpectedly, I reached out to my ex-wife. "Bev, this is Jack. I have something of yours, and I want it back." I phoned the rehab center where Bev resided now. For a few moments, there was no response. "Beverly, I want to give you a shoebox. Can you hear me? Can we arrange to meet so I can return it to you?" I thought she might hang up, but finally she responded, "Where? When? I don't care." We agreed to meet at a neutral location, like a restaurant, or she could come to my house. I suggested Sunday. "Are you free on Sunday?" After a brief silence, she replied, "I'll be there on Sunday." At 2 p.m., the phone rang. How does one prepare to confront their ex-wife, the mother of their child, the woman who attempted to eliminate them, and a convicted felon? I made lemonade and cookies. When Bev arrived, neither of us attempted to shake hands or hug. We exchanged greetings, and I motioned for her to enter the office. Her hair was much shorter than before, and her eyes were stern. She wasn't wearing much, if any, makeup now. At 50 years old, she looked 65. There were drinks, cookies, and a shoebox on the coffee table. She sat down opposite the sofa, and I offered her soft drinks, which she refused. Did she really suspect that I would try to poison her? Well, if you don't want lemonade and cookies, then I suppose all you need is the shoebox and whatever else we have to say to each other. What's the catch, Jack? What do you want instead? Is there anything left? She remained very suspicious. There's no trick, Bev. It's all there, except for a few thousand that I contributed with an equal amount of my own money and gave to Patty as a down payment for her house when she got married. If you wish, she can start returning your share at your convenience. I simply gave her my portion. I could see from Bev's expression that she didn't know Patty was married. Patty has been married for 2 years, and you're already a grandmother. I sensed the tension in her eyes as she struggled with her emotions. The little girl's name is Shannon Beverly Evans. Shannon is the name of her other grandmother. Bev's eyes filled with tears despite her best efforts. Bev, I know you haven't spoken to Patty in a while. There must be a way for you to reconnect. If you want, I can facilitate that. Beverly nodded, tears now streaming down her cheeks. I reached for the box of tissues I had placed on the coffee table. I'll give you the abridged version of our story if you're not ready to leave just yet, I said gently. She wiped tears from her cheek and tried to compose herself. Patty found a great guy named Stan Evans. He's into computers and networks. They seem to click really well. She's a fantastic mom, and they're deeply devoted to each other. Martha and I didn't last long. She's too young for me, and she just needed me temporarily until she could get her life back on track. She found someone else and moved on. I date occasionally, but I end things if it gets too serious. I'm better off solo. I'll stick to being single. There was silence for a while. I'm going to share some thoughts, mainly for my own benefit, but maybe you can glean something useful from them too. I hope so. I couldn't wait to see you in prison. I loathed you and wished you dead many times, but when they locked you up, my feelings started to shift. I found I couldn't revel in my victory anymore, so I let go of my hatred for you, even though you never asked for it. I forgave you because I know you're not entirely to blame. I couldn't understand you until it was too late, and we stopped communicating. We were just bickering. Beverly composed herself and looked up from the floor. She gave me a lost look but remained silent. That's the truth, succinctly and plainly. If you have nothing more to say, and if you're not hungry, I won't keep you any longer. You probably have important things to attend to. She stood up and took the box as she headed toward the front door. For the first time since I pushed her away all those years ago, I called out to her, "Beverly, it doesn't matter now, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I'm curious. Throughout our time together, especially on that last day you were here, it was clear that you saw me as weak. Do you still think I'm a pushover, Bev?" She paused with her hand on the doorknob and glanced back at me. She expressed her feelings bitterly, stating that she hated me and believed I had been cruel, asserting that I had ruined her life. After a moment of pause, she added that she didn't consider me to be a pushover. Following this statement, she disappeared from my life permanently. I am a rural fellow named Bill Carlson. Holding an associate degree in animal husbandry, my lifelong ambition has been to possess my own feed store and raise a family. Upon completing junior college, I wedded my high school sweetheart, Janice, with whom I grew up and envisioned a future. She was the only girl I ever saw myself living with, a lovely brunette with a pleasing physique that endured despite bearing 2 boys. I took immense pride in her as my wife, and was prepared to do anything for her. However, Janice had one issue. She envied those who lived luxuriously. She avidly read society pages and subscribed to magazines featuring glamorous individuals. Even at the dentist's office, she pored over automobile magazines, becoming well-versed in fancy cars and designer clothing lines. She aspired for more, a desire I couldn't fulfill. I secured employment at an upscale feed store in Omaha, catering to the yuppie clientele, allowing us to be nearer to the urban center while pursuing my passion. I enjoyed my work and excelled at it, providing customers with personalized service, which the company acknowledged by granting me flexible hours. Janice initially relished city life over rural living and seemed content. However, when she chose to enter the workforce, we had to resort to daycare for the kids, who didn't seem to mind. Janice landed a position at Gilbert Medical, a medical equipment firm, which she seemed to enjoy as it provided her with the opportunity to dress up and interact with non-farmers. As her career blossomed, her interest in our home life waned, leaving me to handle the majority of childcare duties, from daycare drop-offs to meal preparation and housekeeping, while she focused on laundry, ensuring her clothing remained impeccably ironed. We diligently set aside money each month with the goal of eventually purchasing my own feed store. However, despite both of us working, our savings dwindled. Daycare expenses accounted for some, but the bulk disappeared on beauty treatments, nail salon visits, and expensive clothing purchases. I struggled to comprehend how our dual incomes resulted in diminished savings. Janice refused to address the issue, growing defensive and upset whenever I broached it, so I ceased mentioning it altogether. Nonetheless, I discreetly opened another savings account to keep separate. Meanwhile, Janice began working overtime, engaging in private phone calls, becoming less attentive in our bed life, and expressing desires for a newer, fancier car, and even contemplating chest implants. It left me with no doubt that she was having an affair. Though I'm just a simple guy from the countryside, I'm not naive. Right now, I wasn't interested in salvaging the marriage. I simply wanted to sort things out and move forward before it was too late. Since I didn't socialize with her coworkers, it was tough to pinpoint anything, but I suspected if there was anything going on, it was at her workplace. I had a couple of good buddies at work, not highly educated, but hard workers. Even though I was their boss, I didn't pull rank. The tasks got done without needing to micromanage. We all understood our roles and collaborated well, which fostered a positive relationship. Roy and Freddie would be important allies in my scheme. I noticed that on Wednesdays, Janice would dress up in fancy clothes and linger longer before heading to work. I thought this would be an opportune time to investigate. I briefed the guys on the situation, and they covered for me with my duties. That day, I parked near the entrance of the Gilbert Medical Plant lot, using the time to catch up on technical reading. Around 11 a.m., Janice left and drove to the Holiday Inn lot, parking far from her office. Shortly after, a guy arrived in a red Corvette and parked at the opposite end. Though I didn't recognize him, when he stepped out, Janice followed suit, and they entered a first-floor room number 117, using his key. My heart sank, and I felt queasy. My suspicions were confirmed. Unsure of my next move, I decided to head back to work, taking my time to plan. Before leaving, I snipped 2 of Janice's valve stems with my wire cutters out of frustration. I'm not sure why I didn't target his. The rest of the day dragged on, and I went through the motions of picking up the kids, preparing dinner, and asking Janice about her day, to which she mentioned a flat tire. One of my coworkers changed it for her, and the incident was never discussed again. The following morning, after dropping the boys off at daycare, I swung by the plant. It didn't take long to spot the red Corvette, which conveniently had a reserved parking spot with a sign. I noted the name, Ken Beecham, distribution manager, whose wife also worked at Gilbert. By that afternoon, I had gathered plenty of information about Ken, including his marital status, past issues at work, and personal details. Although I had his contact info and even his SSN, I wasn't sure how to proceed. He'd been married to Amy for 8 years. We completed a productive day's work, and Roy, Freddie, and I managed to squeeze in 1 beer before I had to pick up the kids. Though uncertain about my next move, I had a feeling things would fall into place soon. Despite trying to maintain a calm and logical approach, my frustration grew daily, and occasional silent tears betrayed my inner turmoil. Feeling wounded and unable to mend myself, living with Janice became increasingly unbearable. I longed for it to be over. The following day, luck smiled on me again when I recalled that Marge Gilbert, one of my loyal customers, was married to the president of the Gilbert Medical Company. Though I hadn't met him, Marge and I had a great rapport. I made a conscious effort to be extra friendly with Marge, exploring if our connection could be advantageous. During Marge's visit with her daughter, Cindy, a vet school student, we conversed for about an hour. Enjoying our interaction, I felt a twinge of guilt after she left, but it quickly passed. Over the weekend, I spent time in the garage welding. I fashioned a small piece of flat steel with 4 sharp concrete nail points attached, my initial step toward seeking revenge through annoyance. On Tuesday, while unloading an order, I appeared more subdued than usual, catching Marge's attention. She noticed my demeanor and asked what was wrong that day, expressing concern. I responded, explaining that I was dealing with some personal issues, apologizing for not being my usual self. Sensing my distress, Marge suggested we have coffee and a chat. As we sat in her kitchen, reminiscent of a magazine spread with its stainless steel and granite decor, I couldn't help but think of how Janice would admire it. Marge placed the coffee on the table and leaned in, asking how she could help me. Reluctant to burden her with my problems, I eventually opened up, realizing it might offer some relief. I confessed that I believed my wife, Janice, was being coerced into a lovemaking relationship with one of her superiors at Gilbert Medical, though I lacked evidence. Marge inquired about the basis of my suspicion, prompting me to explain the small signs I had noticed, including finding them both together at the Holiday Inn the previous week. I admitted that Janice was unaware of my knowledge and that I was unsure how to approach the topic, expressing concern about whether she felt obligated or if it was her choice. I also shared that our family life had deteriorated, with Janice seeming indifferent toward the children and me, and that she was keeping it hidden, which bothered me. Marge asked about the individual involved, and I mentioned that I suspected his name was Ken Beecham, but was unsure of Janice's relationship with him or if they worked in different parts of the plant. I confessed that I had never met him. Marge offered to investigate discreetly, and after a moment of contemplation, I agreed, expressing a preference to avoid causing a scene. She assured me she would look into it and mentioned seeing me next Thursday for the oat delivery. I thanked her, and as I prepared to leave, suggested bringing the boys over so Cindy could meet them. Reflecting on the conversation, I felt the outcome exceeded my expectations. I was confident Janice wouldn't object to me taking the boys out, envisioning a good weekend ahead. The next morning, as rain poured, Janice carefully dressed for her day. I observed silently as I dropped the kids off at daycare before stopping by work, where the guys were ready to cover my morning shifts. Roy would use my truck for deliveries and log entries, which I would review later. Freddie brought his cousin's van, and we loaded a floor jack equipped with my steel plate. After ensuring all trucks were loaded, I departed for the Holiday Inn right on time. Janice parked in her usual spot, followed by Ken. Once they entered the room, I waited for about 10 minutes. In the pouring rain, I retrieved the jack from the van and approached Ken's car. I positioned the jack under his engine block, swiftly lifting it and puncturing the oil pan with nails. Moving to the Corvette, I repeated the process on its fuel tank. Oil and gas spilled out as I returned the jack to the van. The entire operation took less than a minute. I then disabled Janice's car once more before driving away. In my rearview mirror, I witnessed the explosion from Ken's car. As I left the lot, a sense of relief washed over me. Janice arrived home from work a bit late. Without eating supper, she headed straight to bed. I spent some time with the boys, giving them a bath and tucking them in. That night, I slept on the couch. The following morning, Janice remained in bed while I got the boys ready for daycare. We had breakfast and left, but she stayed in bed without a word, and her car was absent from the driveway. Around 9 a.m., after loading all the trucks, Lieutenant John Fritz paid me a visit. He was amiable. He inquired about my work schedule from the previous day, to which I explained it consisted of routine deliveries. I then asked if he needed verification of my whereabouts. Mentioning he obtained the delivery logs from the previous day around noon, I showed him the logs detailing each stop. He smiled and chuckled lightly, commenting on the meticulous log and asking if I maintained it daily. I offered to show logs from the past month, but he declined with a shake of his head, still smiling. Despite his demeanor, I couldn't discern whether it was positive or negative. I inquired about the reason for his visit, and after some hesitation, he explained they were investigating a car damaged at the Holiday Inn. I questioned why he involved me, and he explained my wife's car, parked nearby, had 2 valve stems cut, leading them to wonder if it was related to the incident. Expressing unawareness of why my wife's car was at the Holiday Inn, I asked about her connection to the damaged car, which he clarified belonged to a colleague she had a lunch meeting with at the hotel. When I asked if he spoke with the people they dined with, he admitted they couldn't recall their names. Pressing for a straightforward conversation, he leaned back, smiling, and mentioned someone named Ken Beecham. I affirmed that I had never met him. He seemed to believe me, expressing a preference not to get involved in domestic matters. Offering his card, he suggested I contact him if needed, and apologized for bringing the issue to my attention. As he left, I muttered about the lack of substantial information provided and the need to connect the dots. After work, upon returning home with the kids, Janice's car was in the driveway. She was casually dressed and had prepared supper, claiming she felt unwell and had called in sick. She didn't mention the previous day's events, so I didn't broach the subject. She retired early, and once again, I took care of the boys and slept on the couch. The following day, she was up and preparing for work when I left with the boys for daycare. After dropping them off, I visited the doctor's office and requested an STD check. Work proceeded as usual for a Friday. Upon returning home, Janice was there once again. After dinner, I informed her that I planned to take the boys to spend the next day at one of my customers' farms. I offered her the chance to join us, fully aware she'd find an excuse to decline. She mentioned some shopping she wanted to do, and I didn't press further. Whether it was shopping or a date, the outcome remained the same. Saturday at Gilbert's Ranch with Cindy and the boys was fantastic. We enjoyed the entire day together, with Marge preparing a wonderful lunch for everyone. I wished the day wouldn't end. Cindy bonded well with the boys, and they seemed to adore her. Unfortunately, Mr. Gilbert wasn't present, so I still didn't get to meet him. Marge didn't bring up our previous conversation, and it seemed Cindy was oblivious to it. Reluctantly, we had to head home. Janice showed no interest in our day when we returned. The boys attempted to share their adventures with her, but she disregarded them. Eventually, they gave up. She did inquire why I wasn't sleeping in the bed anymore. I explained that work-related stress caused me to toss and turn, and I didn't want to disturb her sleep. That was the last she mentioned it. The following week proceeded without incident. I noticed on her special day that she made no special preparations, leading me to assume the rendezvous for the day was canceled. This suited me fine, as I had plenty of work to catch up on. I visited a divorce lawyer I had heard about, receiving informational handouts and brochures, including fill-in-the-blank forms that caught my interest. Everything returned to normal until the following Wednesday. She began the day with a morning shower, carefully styling her hair. She wore new black lingerie, a new perfume, and what seemed to be new shoes. I made sure she didn't catch me observing, and I hurried out with the boys. I was certain this was a date. After dropping off the boys, I swung by the plant and checked his parking spot. A new Porsche Boxster occupied his slot. I noted down the license number and hastened back to work. The guys shared my excitement about the new development. We rushed through the morning deliveries and manipulated the logs once more. I'm sure John Fritz could see through our charade, but we proceeded nonetheless. We enjoyed an extended lunch break. While Roy continued with the deliveries, Freddie picked up 2 large bottles of hydrochloric acid from the swimming pool supply store. I intended to spend lunch with John Fritz. He gave me a peculiar look when I entered his office with pulled pork sandwiches, fries, and a couple of Cokes. I greeted him and sat down across from him. He sensed something was amiss and grinned broadly. I suggested we grab lunch together and catch up on the car damage case, hoping to keep him occupied for about 2 hours. It was going to be a lengthy lunch. While I kept up a friendly demeanor, Freddie was at the Holiday Inn parking lot. He located the Boxer and meticulously poured acid over the trunk, fenders, and deck. He sliced the convertible top and poured acid over the leather seats and floor mats. The dashboard received its share of acid as well. As an extra measure, he deposited a box of mothballs in the gas tank. The nap, however, would wreak havoc on the engine if anyone attempted to start it. The remaining acid was spread across the top of the tires. Before leaving, he once again snipped the valve stems on Janice's car. It all transpired within 15 minutes. The only downside was not knowing how long they would be in the room. John and I engaged in light conversation for a while, until he asked what I was up to. I casually mentioned ensuring I had a solid alibi in case something happened to Ken Beecham's car that day. When John asked why that day was special, I joked about the pulled pork sandwiches being on special. After that, I called the daycare center and asked Carol to arrange for Janice to pick up the boys, explaining that I would be busy at work that afternoon. John chuckled about the delicious pork sandwiches. After a pause, John asked if he should call Mr. Beecham and inquire about his car. I questioned why he would want to do that and provided him with Mr. Beecham's cell number and the number of the Holiday Inn room 117. John put the phone on speaker and dialed the hotel number. After a few rings, Ken Beecham answered, breathing heavily. Detective Fritz informed him that they still had no leads on who damaged his car and inquired about his new car's whereabouts. Ken seemed surprised by the call and questioned how Detective Fritz got his number. After a brief exchange, Ken mentioned his new car was in the parking lot, and Detective Fritz heard strange noises in the background. Ken abruptly ended the call, stating he needed to get dressed and check something. John grinned at me, asking if I was satisfied. After our conversation, I returned to work. Roy had the logs in perfect condition, and Freddie had discreetly disposed of the acid bottles. That evening at home, Janice picked up the boys but remained silent, going to bed early once more. The following day, John visited me and detailed all the damage to the car, explaining that Ken's insurance was pending since the Corvette incident. The car was totaled, leaving him over $60,000 in debt. Ken insisted I was involved, despite John confirming I was with him at the time. While John naturally suspected my involvement, he couldn't prove anything, nor did he seem inclined to. As for how Janice got her tires fixed, I never inquired, and no one offered any information. Since Janice hadn't come clean about the situation, I decided it was time to put an end to it all. My STD test results came back negative. I had filled out the paperwork for the lawyer to initiate the divorce proceedings. I planned to visit the Gilberts' ranch with the boys this weekend, just in case Cindy was there. If not, we'd spend the day with Marge. The only loose end was lacking evidence of the extramarital affair. The weekend was pleasant. Cindy was present, much to the kids' delight, and we all enjoyed ourselves once more. We felt like a family again, and I missed that, as did the boys. Cindy remained unaware of the situation, but at least she didn't inquire. Before I departed, Marge reassured me with a wink, saying everything would be all right. I was offered a new position about 100 miles away, offering more pay, a better job, and the option to buy into the business in a few years. It seemed perfect, except for the fact that we wouldn't be near Cindy. The following Wednesday, Janice dressed up again. I wasn't sure what kind of car her boyfriend used, but she was clearly preparing for another rendezvous with him. I assumed they were still meeting at the same place. I knew I had to take action, but I hadn't formulated a plan yet. The guys and I were brainstorming when Marge Gilbert pulled up. She signaled for me to approach and silently drove us to the plant. Parking in the back, we entered through a private entrance straight to Mr. Gilbert's office. Marge facilitated introductions, and his secretary brought us coffee. We engaged in small talk for a while, until I finally asked, "Did you bring me here for a reason?" Mr. Gilbert chuckled and mentioned it was time to resolve the situation. He informed me that Marge had briefed him on what was happening, and they had conducted an internal investigation. He assured me that by the end of the day, I would have all the necessary information. He apologized in advance if anything he did cause me damage. We engaged in more conversation, and Marge noticed my grin when Cindy was mentioned. I attempted to conceal it, but did a poor job. Suddenly, the phone rang, catching everyone's attention. Mr. Gilbert received an update and confirmed that everything was set. He explained that Ken and my wife were in their usual room at the Holiday Inn. Ken had driven a company vehicle there, which violated policy, so it was being brought back to the plant. Unfortunately, my wife's car had a couple of flat tires, which seemed to be a recurring occurrence. He then put the phone on speaker and dialed the room. Mr. Gilbert called Ken and informed him of the urgent need to discuss something. Ken seemed surprised and asked what the matter was and how Mr. Gilbert got his number. Mr. Gilbert brushed off the question and explained that the legal department had been alerted to a potential lovemaking annoyance situation. He asked if there was a female employee from their company with Ken. After a moment of silence and indistinct background chatter, Ken confirmed that she was there. Mr. Gilbert asked if she was there willingly or if she was being coerced or threatened. Ken assured him that she was there of her own accord and that the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed appreciation for Ken's honesty on the sensitive issue and stated that they would prepare a statement to confirm the consensual nature of the relationship. He then requested to speak with the young lady. After some background noise, Janice came on the line and asked how she could assist him. Mr. Gilbert asked if Ken coerced or threatened her to accompany him there. Janice confirmed to Mr. Gilbert that Ken hadn't threatened her, and the relationship was consensual. Mr. Gilbert expressed relief and informed them that when they returned to the plant, the statements would be ready for them to sign. He asked to speak with Ken again. Upon Ken's return to the phone, Mr. Gilbert instructed him to come back to the plant for signing papers in the legal department. After hanging up, Mr. Gilbert suggested to Marge that she take me out for lunch and return in a couple of hours once the legal team had finished their work. We enjoyed a fantastic lunch, and although I wanted to express my gratitude, I refrained from doing so. Eventually, Marge convinced me not to discuss the matter or what was done ever again. She also made me promise not to mention anything to Cindy. That was a positive sign. I informed Marge about my new job offer, and she was happy for me and the boys. After lunch, we went back to the plant, where I obtained notarized copies of Ken and Janice's statements. Both confirmed they had engaged in consensual closeness outside their marriage. The legal team assured me this would be sufficient for my lawyer to proceed with the divorce. Ken and Janice were terminated from their positions. Their belongings were packed before their arrival, and they were escorted out of the building. Unfortunately, neither of them had a car. Marge provided me with her card to use temporarily, and I promised to return it the following day. I dropped off the documents at the lawyer's office. She made multiple copies of each, which I intended to send to Ken's wife. I closed our bank accounts, paid off and canceled all credit cards, and arranged for the utilities to be disconnected. On Friday afternoon, I visited John Fritz and assured him I had behaved. He chuckled and mentioned that he had informed the landlord about not renewing the lease next month. Additionally, he had given notice at work, noting that they were supportive but disappointed about his departure. Freddie accompanied me to the Gilbert Ranch with my truck so I could return Marge's car. It was time to pick up the boys and head home. I dreaded walking through the door. Janice's car wasn't in the driveway. When we entered, she was sitting on the couch crying. This was the first time she had shown any emotion at all. 2 file boxes containing her personal belongings from work were nearby. I fed the boys and put on the TV for them. I stood by her, giving her an opportunity to speak if she wanted. She expressed her frustration, stating that I had to interfere and ruin everything in her life. She questioned why I couldn't mind my own business and accused me of not having the right to interfere with hers. I was astonished that she still viewed the situation as solely concerning her, showing no concern for the children or me, nor considering Ken's wife, Amy. Our family, our life, and our plans meant nothing to her. Her only focus was her own actions at that moment. I felt relieved that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life with her. Without a word, I went upstairs and took a shower. Later, while getting the boys ready for bed, she retreated to the bedroom and shut the door. The next day, I took the boys with me to work, ensuring there were no loose ends and that Roy and Freddie could manage the system I'd established. We gathered boxes from stores for the move. Passing by the Holiday Inn, I noticed Janice's car was gone, presumably repaired by now. Fixing the flat tires likely took a toll on her shopping budget for the past month. Janice wasn't home when we returned. We only took clothes and toys, leaving everything else for her to dispose of. She didn't know that by the next day, all the utilities would be shut off. Damn, I was ruthless. As we backed out of the driveway, Janice pulled in. She stood by her car, watching us drive away. I took the boys to Chuck E. Cheese and stayed at a motel overnight. The next morning, I dropped them off at daycare. I gave Carol cookies and party favors, explaining it was their last day and I wanted them to enjoy it with their friends. Before leaving, she pulled me aside and asked about my wife's behavior the previous week. She explained that she didn't want to pry, but since I was leaving, she was curious. She mentioned that my wife seemed furious when she called, demanding to know where she got the number. When she mentioned that I gave it to her, my wife started cursing. Although my wife didn't say anything when she picked up the children, she could tell she was really angry. She apologized for involving Carol, admitting she set her up. She revealed that Janice was having an affair and was at the Holiday Inn with her boyfriend. She hoped that by Carol calling and interrupting their party, Janice would reconsider, but it didn't work, and Janice got mad at both of them. She mentioned that she would be serving Janice with divorce papers that afternoon and would be leaving with the boys for a new job right after picking them up. She acknowledged it was a low blow on her part and apologized for involving Carol. Later, I went to see my divorce lawyer, who had everything ready. I would have custody of the kids, and Janice could have visitation rights whenever she wanted. This arrangement was fine with me, as I didn't think she would be interested in them anyhow. Everything else was split 50-50, but there wasn't much to divide. There was no alimony, child support, or cash settlements. I left her all the furniture, appliances, and household items. I really didn't want them. She kept her car, which I didn't want because it kept getting flat tires. All I had to do was give the papers to Janice. Unless she contested it, everything would be final in 3 months. A copy of Ken and Janice's notarized statement was attached to the divorce paperwork. The lawyer's note indicated that the statements would remain private if all terms were agreed upon. There were no questions. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I sat there for a while. I had loved Janice. She was the only girl I was ever close to. I assumed our relationship was normal and didn't realize I wasn't meeting her needs. She never directly communicated, and I was too oblivious to pick up the clues. I had failed her in many ways. While her actions were deceitful, I felt some of it was due to my inattention. It felt strange knocking on my own door. She opened it, looking tired. She asked if I wanted a drink. I handed her the papers. Without opening them, she looked at them, and then back at me. I asked, "Why?" I couldn't tell if she was angry or sad. After a pause, she expressed her thoughts, highlighting the disparities between them. She pointed out the contrast in scents, noting his aftershave compared to your fertilizer-like odor. The distinction extended to their clothing choices, with him favoring Armani suits while you preferred jeans. Their dining preferences also diverged, as he indulged in lobster while you savored ribs. The dissimilarities continued with his London fog coat juxtaposed against your Carhartt attire, and his fancy car opposed to your truck. She remarked on the state of their nails, with his being manicured and yours consistently dirty. Additionally, she emphasized the difference in their professional statuses, with him having a real job while you were perceived as just a farm boy. She conveyed regret for their marriage, confessing that her initial reasons were misguided, seeking an escape from her parents through the relationship with Bill without considering the long-term consequences. Despite this apology, her sentiments remained unaltered. She professed love for her children, but simultaneously expressed regret for having them, admitting a lack of maternal instinct. The pursuit of someone to fulfill her dreams, she realized, did not bring the satisfaction she anticipated, but left her feeling more dissatisfied with her current circumstances. She acknowledged misleading Bill and acknowledged being an inadequate mother to their children. However, she did not regret the pursuit of her dreams and the quest for something better. In response to my inquiries about his wife, her demeanor swiftly changed. Instead of remorse, she exhibited anger and a refusal to feel sorry for her actions. She communicated a strong desire to follow the life she had always imagined: a husband with a farm boy background and 2 children with unkempt appearances. She asserted her independence, stating that she didn't need assistance and already had the necessary documents. She concluded by urging me to leave so she could proceed with her chosen path in life. Well, that simplified things. I turned and walked out. When I picked up the boys, Carol said to let her know if I needed more phone calls. I called the utility companies and told them not to disconnect until the end of the month. I felt a little sorry for her. The divorce was final in 3 months. I never heard from Janice. The lawyer said everything went smoothly. My new job was great. However, I missed out on the opportunity to buy the business. Someone else got it, along with prime land. They planned to turn it into a horse breeding farm. My job was secure, but my chance at owning my own place took a setback. 2 weeks later, construction started next to the feed store. We speculated about what was being built until one of the guys asked the site engineer. It was a vet clinic for large animals. They completed the building in less than 60 days. The new owner was due to show up Saturday. On the way to lunch, the boys suddenly yelled, "Cindy! Cindy!" There she was, looking better than ever, with Marge. Cindy had become a veterinarian and wanted to raise show horses while running a large animal clinic. She was building a house nearby. We all went to lunch together, and Cindy shared her plans. The boys and I were beaming all the way home that night. 5 years later, Cindy had a successful clinic and horse breeding venture. I owned 6 feed stores. The boys had 2 baby sisters they adored. My mother-in-law, Marge, and Mr. Gilbert visited every weekend. I never learned his first name, and Janice never visited the boys. Second story. I'm at a loss for where to begin. It's devastating to realize my wife no longer wants to live with me. What's worse is her refusal to provide a reason. She's resistant to moving in with me, and my mother supports her in this decision. Allow me to provide some context. I'm a 51-year-old man who had to leave my hometown 13 years ago for work, leaving my wife, Mona, who is 48, and our 2 children in Texas. They are now 23 and 21, residing independently in Houston. Around 14 years ago, during the U.S. recession caused by the housing bubble, our business collapsed overnight. With my father's passing and me running his construction business, everything fell apart. Balancing the care of my mother, 2 school-age kids, and my wife became overwhelming in such an unstable economy. After depleting all our savings, I had no choice but to make the tough decision to move out. After exploring opportunities in various Asian countries, I eventually established my business in Dubai. Though challenging, the drive to provide for my family kept me going. After leaving Texas, it took me over a year before I could return home to establish my new venture. Since then, I visited home every 5 to 6 months. I desired to bring my family with me, but Mona and the kids were reluctant due to concerns about disrupting their schooling. Last year, when my youngest daughter finished college and secured a job, I planned to visit home to spend time with her. During that visit, I suggested to Mona that we relocate here now that the children have moved out, but she declined, fearing leaving my mother alone. I proposed bringing my mother along, but they both opposed the idea of leaving their hometown, citing the vast cultural differences in the Middle East. They had valid concerns, so I didn't press further. During my last visit home, I shared with Mona my intention to wrap up things in Dubai and return to Texas. I anticipated her excitement, but instead, she reacted unhappily. I inquired why she didn't want us to live together, and she explained she was content but puzzled why I'd leave everything behind. While she had a point about the sacrifices made to establish myself in Dubai, after 13 years away and with our children grown, I longed to return to my comfort zone. I reassured her about our finances and plans to establish something in Texas given the improved economy. However, she remained unconvinced, which raised concerns for me, though I gave her the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, my mother dropped by unexpectedly and advised against my quick decision to return. Since I hadn't shared my plans with her or anyone else, it must have been Mona who informed her. I was taken aback. Similar to Mona, my mom's concern made me doubt myself. I began to wonder if I was making a mistake and ultimately abandoned the idea. However, I couldn't shake off the distress caused by my wife's reluctance to live with me. While her reasoning might make sense, I felt devastated by Mona's emotional distance. This feeling consumed me so much that upon returning home, I reduced my calls and texts with her. I hoped she would notice and inquire, but she seemed indifferent to whether everything was okay. There were days when I didn't reach out, and she didn't either. Over time, her communication became purely transactional, indicating that she no longer relied on me. So last month, I confronted her, questioning if she still loved me. She dismissed it as overthinking, explaining that she was busy caring for the household and my aging mother. I was at a loss for words. It's uncommon for a wife to bond so well with her mother-in-law and care for them. While I appreciated Mona's kindness to my mom, my unease grew daily. I couldn't comprehend why she didn't want me home when we already had our own house. Our major responsibilities were fulfilled, and I reassured her that our lifestyle wouldn't suffer. It just didn't make sense. Yes, I considered the same possibility as you all might be thinking. Perhaps she found someone else. But how could I uncover the truth? She hadn't shown any other signs until now. She had been a fantastic mother, bravely raising our children during my absence. It wasn't easy. She fulfilled all her roles gracefully. Sometimes I feel guilty for suspecting her, but you know how challenging long-distance relationships can be. Update. Mona had been having an affair, and my mother had known all along but never told me. I can't understand why I deserved this fate. I arranged a surprise trip home without informing anyone, not even my mom. As I entered my house, I dreaded encountering Mona with her lover. It's somewhat ironic, given the stories I've heard about cheating spouses of deployed spouses. Thankfully, that scenario didn't unfold. Mona was in the kitchen when I used the spare key to enter the house. She was visibly shocked to see me. To conceal my surprise visit, I brought a bouquet. Although Mona seemed surprised, she also appeared suspicious of my unexpected arrival and bombarded me with questions. I explained that I had light work that month, prompting me to come home. Mona managed a forced smile, pretending to be pleased, but it was clearly insincere. Over the next few weeks, I painstakingly uncovered the truth. I resorted to tactics I'm not proud of, but I felt I had no choice. I snooped through her phone, listened in on her conversations, planted a GPS tracker in her car, and trailed her around town. This investigation yielded information bit by bit, painting a clear picture of what was happening in my absence. It transpired that she had been seeing someone for the past 8 years. Upon my return home, Mona was unusually guarded about her phone, unlike before, when she would clean up all evidence. This time, she didn't have the chance. Although I attempted to snoop through her phone on the first day, I was unsuccessful. When I eventually gained access, I found nothing incriminating. She likely wiped it clean at the first opportunity. The affair came to light when I tracked her movements using a GPS device in her car. Initially, I didn't suspect anything when I observed her entering a hardware store. However, upon waiting for her return, I noticed the owner closing the shop. It left me feeling dizzy. Hours later, I saw Mona leaving the shop, and the owner reopened it once her car had departed. I considered entering the shop to confront her lover, but I hesitated, fearing he might recognize me and ruin my plan. I patiently waited for her next visit, hoping to catch them in the act. She typically ventured out in the afternoon, sometimes visiting my mom with friends or relatives. I followed her everywhere, hoping to catch her with her paramour. Finally, yesterday, she went to visit my mom. Ordinarily, I refrained from following her further on such occasions, which is why it took me so long to catch them. But yesterday, I remained vigilant and witnessed them leaving the house together. It didn't strike me as suspicious at the time. I assumed they were heading for shopping or some other errand. Though I initially resisted the urge to follow them, something compelled me to do so. They stopped at the hardware store, and my heart sank when I saw her lover greet them. Both Mona and my mom exited the car. Her lover kissed Mona in front of my mom, and they conversed briefly. Then, he hugged my mom before she got back in the car and drove off. Mona and her lover entered his shop, and he closed the shutter behind them. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Betrayal from one's spouse is one thing, but betrayal from one's own mother is unimaginable. The truth overwhelmed me to the point where I had to take a few moments to catch my breath before proceeding to the shop. My knocks went unanswered, so I persisted until her lover finally opened the door. I demanded to know where Mona was, and he froze. I pushed past him and stormed into the shop. Before he had a chance to respond, the lights went out, and I heard a faint voice from the storeroom. Hastily, I rushed in to find my wife lying exposed, pleasuring herself and calling out for someone else. It lasted only a moment before someone else leaped at me and dragged me out as Mona screamed loudly. The scene was so chaotic that it took me a while to grasp what was happening. I struck the intruder and broke free. By then, Mona had emerged, hastily covering herself. I seized her by the arm and demanded to know how long this had been going on, but Mona intervened, pleading for us to discuss it at home. Aware I could face consequences for the altercation, I backed off, exited, and drove away. I headed to my mom's place. Bursting inside, I shouted accusations, convinced she was aware. Mona had already informed her, as my mom's lack of surprise indicated. She simply cried and held my hand, urging me to calm down. I collapsed emotionally. Soon, Mona joined us. Seeing her face only fueled my anger. I implored them both to tell me the truth. After much prodding, Mona confessed to feeling deeply lonely during my absence, for 13 years. I had been so consumed with work that I had little time for her. My calls were brief check-ins about the kids and mom. But what about me? I demanded to know how long this had been going on. She admitted, perhaps 7 or 8 years. Shocked, I felt like a fool. I had toiled abroad for years to provide for my family, only to find this betrayal waiting for me at home. I questioned why she hadn't sought a divorce if our connection had deteriorated so much. She broke down again, insisting she loved me, and the affair was solely to alleviate her loneliness. He meant nothing to her, she claimed. I couldn't believe it. I turned to my mom, asking how I deserved such betrayal from her. She wept, pleading for understanding, explaining Mona had been caring for her. Once I had all the answers, I rose to leave. They tried to stop me, but I warned them not to. I instructed Mona not to return home, needing time alone. Driving back, I felt nauseous, unsure how to process it all. Was this affair truly my fault for sacrificing so much for my family? Update. I spent the following days deeply immersed in sorrow. Afterwards, I drove to Houston to see my grown daughters. They weren't children anymore. They deserved to know what their mother had been doing while I provided for them. I also did it to protect myself. My intention was to leave the country, fearing Mona might manipulate my daughters against me. They were devastated by the truth. The older one even suspected Mona and my mom were up to something. She also mentioned suspecting my mom of seeing a widower nearby. However, that was not my concern. My dad had passed away years ago, so my mom could do as she pleased. Yet, she supported Mona, causing problems for me. The following day, I packed up and returned home. Mona and Mom had been calling incessantly. Since then, I think they came home to find an empty house, facing reality. Initially, I left them for a month. The calls and texts were filled with apologies, pleading for my return. But eventually, they became concerned about money. I intentionally didn't block them, wanting to see their anxiety. Without funds, I froze my bank accounts and credit card. They panicked, realizing they had no income. Mom's state pension wasn't enough to sustain their lifestyle. They tried everything to reach me, but I ignored them. Mom resorted to emotional manipulation, claiming my late father would be heartbroken. Their pleas fell on deaf ears. I never suspected Mona. I never checked her phone like people in long-distance relationships do, but I always respected her privacy more than Mona. I felt betrayed by my mom sometimes, especially when I sensed something was off with Mona. Witnessing their strong bond made me feel betrayed in return. Their excuse for covering up Mona's affair was weak. Feeling lonely, she chose to cheat? She felt alone despite having family and friends around? Compared to her, I was lonelier, literally alone in a foreign land. I could have done the same, but I didn't. I was focused on my family's well-being, working hard to save and return home. When their attempts to contact me failed, they reached out to my daughter for help. Mona didn't know I had told the truth to the girls, and she did exactly what I expected. She spoke ill of me in front of them, alleging I had cut them off financially or was having an affair. However, my daughter saw through her lies and confronted her, driving her away that day. But Mona continued to reach out to my younger daughter, exploiting her innocence for money. However, I won't intervene. She's an adult who knows what to do. Mom has also reached out to my daughter for financial help. As for me, I'm still unable to move on from the feeling of betrayal. I haven't considered divorce yet. Divorce would be financially and personally beneficial for Mona if she wants to marry someone else. However, I won't pursue it. She's already living in my house, and that's the most she can get from me. Being out of the country with no accountability, whether divorced or not, doesn't matter to me. I'm focused on moving on with my life. Update. After cutting off their financial support, they exhausted all possible resources. While my older daughter refused to assist, the younger one was manipulated into helping. However, her earnings from her low-paying first job barely cover her essentials. Despite this, she's saving some to assist her mother, which made me proud. Eventually, she became overwhelmed and suggested Mona find employment to support herself. But Mona took her assistance for granted, insisting it was her daughter's duty to care for her. Despite doing her best with her limited income, my younger daughter reached her breaking point and ceased providing support. Unable to marry someone new while still married to me, Mona has been pressuring me for a divorce. She's threatened legal action, but I'm unfazed. Being abroad, I doubt she has the resources or knowledge to pursue legal action across borders. Plus, in this country, there are no legal consequences for abandoning a cheating spouse. So, good luck to her with that. Currently, Mona works at her partner's shop, though I'm unsure of her compensation, whether it's money or something else. Her partner doesn't even have a proper home, residing in a camper, and his financial situation seems inadequate to support Mona, as far as my mom is concerned. Sometimes, I feel guilty for cutting her off and consider helping her out. However, she receives a pension that should suffice for her needs. She brought this situation upon herself. Perhaps I'll reconcile with her in the future, but not now. Although she's apologized, it didn't feel sincere. I'll wait until she truly regrets her actions and my anger subsides, allowing love to prevail. Some advise me to move on and enjoy the vibrant lifestyle of Dubai, but it's not all as glamorous as portrayed on social media. It requires a substantial amount of money. Moreover, the legal landscape regarding women is stringent here, and I'm not interested in using women to cope with my grief. However, I've been traveling extensively since then, exploring places like China and Bali, with plans to visit more Asian countries and experience their cultures.